The story begins late in the evening in one of the cafes, just when there was a huge load. Even the meat could burn. The man asked the waitress for more beer, and most importantly, a cold one. And the woman, perplexed, asked how much longer she had to press the bell. The waitress immediately ran to the visitor, saying that she was already running. However, she couldn't understand why there were so many people today. She was quite tired. Soon the action moves to the end of the shift. Finishing work, the girl tied up garbage bags. By the way, this shift even made her dizzy. The assistant told Hannah that she had worked well today, so she should rest. The girl said that she still had time before the next shift came. She decided to go and do some cleaning, so she told her assistant that she could go. The girl sighed, hoping that her friend wouldn't drive herself into the grave. Nevertheless, Hannah naturally wanted to relax, although the rent and the loan had completely different plans for her. She had been working day and night for the past few days, so it felt like her head was going to explode. At that moment, she received a message, so she took out her phone and looked at what it was. As it turned out, the last chapter of the novel was coming out today. At least something saved her. She decided that she would read a little and then immediately close the shift. The girl began to do this and stared at the screen. After a couple of minutes, she was incredibly surprised because blood began to flow from her nose. Hannah stared at the bloodstains in confusion and wondered, what was this? She had never seen anything like this before. However, she couldn't finish her thought, because a couple of seconds later, she fell to the ground. After a while, the action takes us to the blonde girl who was asked to help the children. Selena, help the children. Instantly, she began to rise, thinking that she had fallen asleep. Anyway, her first thoughts were about work, because she was late. As soon as the girl got out of bed, she froze in horror. What kind of place is this? The girl began to look around the room she was in surprise, when suddenly a voice addressed her and asked her to lie back down. The source of this voice was a handsome brunette who was being dressed by a maid. Our heroine, of course, began to examine him with her own eyes, and the guy at that moment assumed that she was probably tired after their first night. He turned around and said he would call the servants and maids. Soon he turned to Hans and asked if he was nearby. The man immediately said he was there. In turn, the girl thought about the fact that this guy in front of her looked exactly like the main character of the novel, I Stole My Sister's Husband. Killian Seafried? Our heroine refused to believe until the very end that she was reborn in the world of this work. By the way, the novel itself is in the BL novel genre, and the plot itself is quite simple. Cyan is Selena's younger brother and one of the main characters. He admired Killian, who was nicknamed the Shield of the Empire. However, as soon as they met in person at the girl's birthday party, Cyan fell hopelessly in love. In turn, the girl, betrayed by both her brother and her husband, gave in to blind jealousy. She attempted to poison Cyan, but was eventually killed by her own husband. And it turns out that of all the people in the novel, she managed to be reborn into Selena's body. It couldn't be worse. At that moment, Killian turned his head to his wife and asked if something had happened. Why was she looking at him like that? Our heroine jumped up and began to shake her head, saying that everything was fine. In this case, the guy smiled and asked his wife to get some rest. As soon as the guy left the room, our heroine sat down on a chair and asked herself one logical question. Why is this happening for real? She tore her hair out trying to wake up because she hoped until the very end that this would be a dream. She didn't want to die at the hands of her husband. There couldn't be a worse ending. After that, Selena raised her head and looked at her face. With a heavy sigh, she realized that everything was bad. The girl suggested that if she couldn't return, she should resign herself to it and get used to life here. And if you think about it, she is still in Selena's body. She is the daughter of a Grand Duke with the strongest ties to the imperial family. She is also the wife of the Duke of one of the founding houses of the Empire, even though he cheated on the main character with her brother. The very fact that she is fully provided for. Selena's blind jealousy caused her death, so our heroine decided not to be jealous of them. Moreover, she is not against such a relationship. Instead of trying to change the ending by interfering with the natural course of history, the girl decided to just wait. That is why it turns out that she will divorce her husband just when the right time comes. Soon after that, her life will get better. She will be able to spend the alimony on a house in a quiet place, and she will live there happily ever after. Our heroine nodded her head, thinking that this was just a win-win idea. She had dreamed of something like this her whole life. At that moment, a voice was heard. A certain Lily came to the madam and asked if she could come over. Our heroine, of course, did not really understand who Lily was, but nevertheless, she had to remain calm. As soon as Selina told the girl that she could come in, the maid immediately entered the room. Lily began questioning our heroine, asking her how she liked the Duke. Was he gentle? Selina tensed up and asked her what she was talking about. The maid sighed heavily and reminded Madame that she had promised to tell her everything. Selina immediately assumed that, judging by her familiarity, this was her personal maid. Our heroine laughed and asked if she was sure, because she didn't remember it. Lily, perplexed, said that it was a month ago when they were riding in a carriage. In this case, our heroine was able to determine that she was at the very beginning of the novel. Killian and Sion will start a relationship only a few months later at Selina's birthday party. At that moment, the girl asked the maid if she remembered when her birthday was. Lily asked again in confusion, but said that it was in early summer when the lilies were blooming. Our heroine raised her head in surprise and asked what season it was. Lily looked at Madame in bewilderment and asked if everything was okay with her. Taking a mug of tea, the girl decided that Lily really had enough stupid questions. In any case, she didn't really know anything about the Duke's family. That's why she began to realize that she could be exposed if things continued like this. At that very moment, our heroine turned to Lily and asked with whom she could gossip about high society. The maid, who was busy with something else at the time, raised her head in surprise and began to think about candidates for this role. A moment later, our heroine came to the seamstress, Mrs. Siobhan Robellini, who smiled sweetly and greeted Selina. The girl said that it was a real honor to meet her. She had always dreamed of sewing her a dress. Selina thanked her for being able to come so quickly. However, she understood that the Duke's means had contributed to this. He had not shown his face to her since their wedding night, but the Duke was still a good husband. Siobhan glanced out of the window at this point and guessed that Madame must be unaccustomed to living so far from the capital. Our heroine thoughtfully said that it was indeed a bit difficult. There was no one to discuss the latest high society news with, and people were completely unaware of the latest fashion trends. However, the seamstress turned her head sharply and, looking at her ladyship, said that she immediately remembered the rumor about. At that very moment, she fell silent, and Siobhan began to apologize, saying that she shouldn't have said that. Selina was surprised. What kind of rumor was this? The girl knew she had to get this information out. If she had to get Lady Siobhan to talk, our heroine decided to act. The girl began to cheat, saying that she had not been sleeping at all in the last few days because of this rumor. The seamstress then looked at Selina in surprise and asked if the rumor that his lordship had killed his brother's sons was true. Our heroine certainly wasn't expecting this information, so when she learned about the murder, she was shocked. Lady Siobhan said in bewilderment that she thought Selina had heard about it. Selina said that was not the case, so she asked for more details. Siobhan's face visibly twisted. So, as it turns out, the Seyfried house used to be the center of attention of all high society. Despite the imperial monster hunt that had existed for generations, the previous duke was still actively involved in the affairs of the capital. Soon after, the news of the duchess's pregnancy was a joy to all the imperial nobility. But one day, a rumor spread that the duke and duchess had died on the same day, and the duke's younger brother, Killian Seyfried, became the head of the house. The capital's nobility found this fact strange, since the previous duke had previously given birth to twins. However, it was not possible to shed light on the situation, as Killian Seyfried closed the entrance to his estate. Siobhan explained that the duke had heirs, but his brother inherited the title. It even sounds strange. This is why rumors spread that Duke Killian had cold-bloodedly murdered his brother's entire family in order to remain the sole heir to their house. Siobhan, holding a cup of tea in her hands, said with guilty eyes that she thought Selina would know better about this. Is it really true that she didn't know about this whole situation? The action takes us to the butler, to whom the guy turned, asking what Selina is doing now. The man said that Her Highness was currently receiving a seamstress from the capital. The guy was very surprised. At this point, the butler said that he thought the lady might believe the capital's gossip. Killian turned around and reminded her that they were already married. Whether she believed it or not, it wouldn't change anything. And again, the action takes us to another time. The action is transferred 5 years back to the imperial ball. While Duke Killian was enjoying his solitude, a girl approached him and asked if he was really Duke Seyfried. Of course it was Selena who noticed that the Duke's pendant had a wolf on it. Killian bowed before Miss Kiev, greeting her, and soon after introduced himself. Soon after his words, the girl said that she had heard that the view of the stars from the snowy plains of the north was beautiful. However, it was sad to realize that such beautiful landscapes were available to them at any time, while she would never be able to admire them. Killian immediately wondered, hadn't this mad woman heard of the bloody massacres on the snowy plains? In any case, he decided to answer her more tenderly, so he assured her that such a beautiful lady as she had nothing to do there. Selena was very surprised, so she asked him if he really thought she would be cold. Killian turned his head and said that it was not that at all. Our heroine, despite his doubts, smiled and said that she would like to visit there one day. Killian, looking at the daughter of the Grand Duke, understood that she was too naive. That was his first impression of Selena Kiev. Soon the action takes us some time ahead. Selena's father was addressing Killian, saying that his daughter was head over heels in love with him. Killian certainly didn't want to hear those words, considering they had only met once. However, the girl's father said that he was too worried about her, so he wanted to know if Killian wanted to marry his daughter. The man said that he was aware of his family's discontent, that he still had no heir, and therefore was even ready to give a mine of magic stones in the west as a dowry. The guy raised his head in surprise and asked how he could deserve such generosity. After all, he decided to say that his reputation among the nobility was far from the best. However, the man said that parents tend to follow their children's lead. He then whispered in his ear that he hoped he would make the right choice. Apparently, after some time, Killian and Selena got married. Shortly after, the action moves to the present. Killian, on the contrary, hoped that she would believe that the gossip is not a lie. Once Killian learns of the curse, she will want to return to her home. The butler asked in surprise how long he would keep the young master and mistress a secret. Killian lowered his head and sighed heavily, saying that he would do this as long as it took. At least he would keep the secret until the curse was miraculously lifted. Shortly after that, the butler left the room. Standing in front of the closed door, the man wondered if he should just leave things as they were. As soon as he turned around, to his surprise, he saw Selena in front of him. The man decided not to run away, so at that moment, he approached the lady and asked her to stop. The butler smiled and asked how Mrs. Robellini's reception had gone. Our heroine, with a smile on her face, said that everything was fine. The man smiled and said that he was very glad to hear this. However, immediately after that, he began to look guilty. Our heroine noticed this, so she stopped him, saying that he should not worry about rumors. The man asked again in bewilderment. Selena confidently said that all these rumors do not scare her. All this food and entertainment, or rather, her current life, completely suits her. And what's more, if you think about it, then until the affair between Killian and Sion, the girl is going to be above water, below grass. Selena said that it was simply unbearable in the Grand Duchy. Her father decided what she wore, ate, and who she hung out with. That was why she hoped that the butler would help her maintain the current state of affairs. Of course, the man was surprised to hear all these words, but he could do nothing but agree. After this conversation, the action moves to the evening. Our heroine was lying on the bed and getting ready for bed. Selena knew she was only being cool in words. But what if Killian really did kill his older brother's entire family? However, our heroine understood that she would not have been surprised if she had read about it in a novel. This genius had eliminated his wife without hesitation. However, infanticide is too grave a sin. In any case, the girl understood that she would not be able to find out the whole truth, simply because she would not be able to ask directly. But as soon as the girl fell asleep, something strange began to happen. Someone began to scratch at her window, a huge dragon watching Selena. However, someone told the dragon that she should not see them. Just at that very moment, our heroine turned her head and began to open her eyes. At that very moment, the dragon realized that he had been spotted, so he immediately jumped up and began to fly away. As soon as our heroine managed to understand what had happened, there was no one outside the window. Soon the action takes us to the morning. Lily was surprised to say that if she understood correctly, the lady saw a dragon yesterday. Our heroine said that it was true. He looked her straight in the eyes. Lily was very surprised that the lady had personally encountered him. Putting her hand to her head, the maid asked if it was definitely not a dream. However, after removing her hand, she realized that there was no temperature. Selina, perplexed, began to say that she would not lie. With a heavy sigh, Lily said that this dragon fought with the god Kanu and almost destroyed the primeval world. The maid laughed and asked if they were talking about this dragon or not. Selina was surprised that dragons were not in all worlds here. However, if it was not a dragon, then what did she see that night? At that moment, Lily happily said that she would like to see such a cutie herself. Just think, a dragon with a child's voice. Our heroine, after these words of the maid, realized even more that it was useless to continue. Maybe she was just very tired, and she imagined it. However, remembering last night, the girl understood that everything felt real. At this point, the maid told Madame that it was time for them to go, otherwise she would be late for breakfast with the Duke. After a while, the action takes us to a banquet hall. Selina and Killian were sitting opposite each other. Our heroine still couldn't stop thinking about the creature she saw last night. If it wasn't a dragon, then what was it? Looking at the Duke, she wondered if this was the monster that Madame Robellini had spoken of. And yet, even while eating, she understood that there was no point in guessing. She had to check it herself right now. Our heroine immediately jumped up, saying that she had to go. Killian raised his head in confusion and asked what this meant. The girl said that he had spoken of a horse arriving from the Grand Duchy, so she was very keen to see it. However, Selina asked if it was rude to him, because she did not want to offend him. The guy shook his head and said that she hadn't offended him at all, so if she had finished eating, she could go. Shortly before leaving, our heroine turned around and said that it would be great to just have dinner together, because she had a hard time waking up in the morning. To say that Killian was surprised to hear such words from the naive Selina is to say nothing. The guy started drinking champagne and thinking that something was wrong with her. Already on the street, our heroine understood that she had lied, and this lie would be revealed very quickly. Perhaps she should have told the truth at least to Lily. However, it is somehow difficult to eat when people are staring at you non-stop. In any case, our heroine arrived at her destination. If she saw him from the window, then he was here. At that very moment, Selina felt Lily's voice asking for help. Our heroine turned around in bewilderment and asked again. How could she have heard her? Where was she? And still the voice did not stop. Someone was asking her to help her, but the girl did not understand what was happening. At that moment, our heroine realized that she had heard the same voice and request for help just when she woke up for the first time. The girl, looking into the depths of the forest, thought that she should quickly go, look, and return. However, at this rate, our heroine went very far from the estate. Even looking back, she realized that she was getting further and further away from the mansion, and she still hadn't found anything. Suddenly, the girl turned her head and saw a huge creature in the air. What is it? The girl, in bewilderment, began to scream and tell the creature that she saw him yesterday. Our heroine was incredibly glad that it wasn't a dream after all, but how to stop it? However, at that moment, the huge creature fell to the ground. Our heroine began to run towards it. As soon as she came closer, the dragon jumped up and threw the girl back with his energy. The blow was strong enough that Selina was thrown back several meters. Soon the action moves to the palace. The bewildered butler said that he could not find the Duchess. Killian replied that the girl had told him that she was going to look at a horse from the Grand Duchy. It would be worth looking for it in the stables. At that moment the butler asked again, saying that the horse had not yet been brought. The man said they were told she was being held at the terrace estate because the road was snowy. At that very moment, a guy and a maid came running to them, starting to talk about the fact that they had information. They saw footprints on the path next to the rose garden. However, they broke off, so it was impossible to follow them further. Killian immediately grabbed Lily by the shoulder and began asking where Selina usually went at this time. The girl, shivering, said that Madame rarely left the mansion in the cold. At that moment, the guy asked if there was anything different in her behavior. Maybe some oddities? The girl thought about it at that moment. Lily lowered her head and said that Selina had told her that she had seen a dragon at night. Killian's face instantly changed. Lily said she initially thought she was dreaming the whole thing, but she kept insisting she saw a dragon with a child's voice. Just then, Killian slammed his hand down on the table. The boy turned around and told the butler to call the Black Wolves. They had to find Selina. Soon after this, some time passed. As soon as the moon rose over the mansion, a man came to the Duke. He turned his head and said that he had gathered the most reliable Black Wolves left in the castle. These are the Black Wolves, the elite squad of Shivar's knights. The first to introduce herself was the brave wolf Gabriel Tomer, followed by Zeke Legier and also Håkon Jensen. All of them were at Killian's service. The Duke didn't beat around the bush, so he told the knights that they already knew that monsters had kidnapped Selina, the Duchess of House Siegfried. Moreover, these same monsters kidnapped his nephew and niece, the children of his deceased elder brother. The action takes us to sunny days, 7 years earlier. Young Killian said that if a boy was born, he would teach him fencing. Remfry asked in surprise if he really wanted a nephew that much. The guy smiled and said that he really did. However, the fencing teacher decided to ask what would happen if the baby was a girl. Killian said that he would ask his brother to appoint him as her personal bodyguard in that case. If she takes after her parents in appearance, then there will be no one more beautiful than her in the entire empire, and that means that everyone and anyone will be hunting for her hand. That's why Killian wanted to personally find her the best groom. Remfry was glad to hear that the guy was so well disposed. At that very moment, taking advantage of the young gentleman's inattention, Sir Winter knocked the sword out of his hands. The man laughed and told the boy that before he could fulfill all his promises, he had to get married himself. Killian, confused, started saying that it wasn't fair. Remfry laughed and advised him not to get distracted. At this point, the training was interrupted by the cries of Hans, who was looking for Mr. Winter. Killian asked Hans in confusion what had happened, to which the butler told the guy that he had to run to the maternity ward immediately. Remfry, in exactly the same bewilderment, asked Sir Kramer what had happened and that he could not tell them. However, at that moment, the three of them went into the palace, where the situation was very strange. Only when he entered did Mr. Winter smell the disgusting smell of monsters. Where would they even come from in the Duke's estate? At that moment, the man noticed that dead knights were lying in front of the entrance to her Grace's room. Sir Winter instantly ran into his lordship's room, asking what had happened. As soon as he looked inside, his face instantly changed from fear to complete shock. The man turned to Killian and asked him not to come near, so the guy froze a little in horror. Remfry said that he should not go inside until he said so. Killian, however, did not agree to this, because his brother and his sister-in-law were there. The boy didn't listen to Remfry, so they both went inside. Killian, confused, started calling for his older brother. Nevertheless, his lordship began to ask his brother to protect the children. All this time, their conversation was interrupted by children's cries. But there was one thing. Killian didn't understand how these monsters could cry like children. And moreover, was this old woman really his daughter-in-law? And most importantly, why is Kirschian in such a state? What happened to him? The guy could no longer answer this question. At that moment, Hans entered the room, trying to take the gentleman away from here, telling him not to come closer. The man told Remfry that one thing was unclear, when exactly the children would start to rampage again, so it was necessary to activate the cleansing stone. Hans's only request was to get the gentleman out of here, which Killian, of course, did not agree to, so he began to scream. But he could no longer do anything. He should have dealt with them himself 7 years ago, but he didn't. To the outside world, monsters don't exist and never will. The squad of Black Wolves listened to the Duke and soon said that they were waiting for his order. The man instructed Gabriel to go to the western forest. Håkon was to investigate the ramparts, and Zeke was to strengthen the mansion's barrier. Management and reports would be on him. Each of them said that they understood their business, and so they all ran in different directions. Soon after, the Duke gave his final orders. telling Remfry that he himself knew what he had to do. Remfry bowed before His Majesty and said that he understood. He would immediately head to the annex. Soon after, Killian looked at the man and bitterly asked him to find her. With tears in his eyes, the guy said that he couldn't stand it one more time. Remfry put his hand on his lordship's shoulder and said he would bring them all back. The Duchess and the young lord and lady would be all right. Soon after, this action takes us to our heroine. The girl at this moment woke up in an unknown place. Looking down at her feet, she noticed that her feet were tied, but the rope wasn't tied very tightly. Had she been kidnapped? Rather strange kidnappers. At that moment, she heard voices. One of them asked what if the girl had died. The other answered that it was nothing, since to see him, you had to try not to faint. Our heroine looked at the door, from the cracks of which light was coming. Could it be that those who brought her here were there? As she got closer, she heard them more clearly. One of the voices asked the assistant not to shout, otherwise they would wake her up. Selina realized that, judging by the voice, they were children. Moreover, our heroine realized that she had heard them before. At that moment, one of the voices asked that if she had already woken up, they didn't need to drag her here. However, in response to this, another voice said that she could freeze and die, so it would be better for her to stay with them. The boy, perplexed, said that this was unacceptable. They were the ones to be afraid of. The guy offered to turn the clock back and return her to where they dragged her from before she woke up. The only question was whether Irene would drag her away again. Our heroine, having heard their plan, was very surprised, so she did not understand what they were even talking about now. As soon as the children started counting, Selina realized that she had to run, so she instantly threw the door open and screamed. However, at that moment, she noticed only the gaze of two small children, who were no less surprised than she was. Selina was puzzled. They looked no older than 7 years old. But what were children doing here? At that moment, the boy began to scream and ask Irene to buy him time while he turned the clock. Nevertheless, our heroine began to try to calm them down, saying that they needed to calm down. But Irene wasn't going to listen to this stranger, so she immediately slammed her fist on the table. Our heroine was shocked by the power she saw, and in a little girl at that. The boy at that moment told Irene that she was doing well, and now she had to hit the girl on the head. Irene, perplexed, said that it would hurt, but the boy insisted. A frightened Irene turned her gaze to the equally frightened Selina and sighed. The girl began to say that if it was necessary, she would hit her very lightly. Our heroine no longer understood what was happening, but still asked them to stop. Selina said that they should discuss what was happening, and then she would do whatever they said. In this case, the guy asked her in an uncertain voice to stand up, close her eyes, and not open them. Selina was surprised by this request. Do they really not want to show something? However, they are about 7 years old, so there is nothing to be afraid of. The guy was about to do something, when suddenly our heroine sighed heavily and said that she had already thought about finding friends. These words instantly changed Irene's expression, because she was also looking for a friend. The guy was of course shocked that Irene had violated their inaccessibility. Irene nevertheless said that it was incredibly boring here. They sit here without leaving. There is no one to even talk to. The guy asked again how many times he should be reminded that people are afraid of them. However, the girl, perplexed, asked Erhi to take a look for himself. Pointing her finger at the girl, with her eyes closed, she asked if it looked like she was afraid of them. Soon after, our heroine happily sat down next to them and said that her name was Selina. Erhi was disappointed, but Irene was incredibly happy. The girl greeted her new acquaintance with great enthusiasm. But Erhi sighed heavily and looked away. Selina asked Irene if she understood correctly that she also wanted to play with her. The girl, despite her brother's warnings, said that she was right. In this case, our heroine decided to offer them to play hide-and-seek. She will play with them and persuade Irene to tell where the exit is. Soon the action takes us to Remfry, who at this moment came to the house. Entering inside, he realized that no one had broken in from the outside. At that moment, as he was going inside, he saw a body lying on the ground. In that case, everything is probably okay. Coming closer, he caught my eye. He was definitely alive, just sleeping. But the sleeping herb, that's interesting. The man laughed in his head. What was surprising was that they used plants just like people. But at that moment, memories from 7 years ago appeared in his head when he had just seen two monsters in the middle of his lordship's room. He squeezed his eyes tightly and decided that he couldn't give in to such thoughts, because everything had to be different. Getting up from the ground, he began to look around the room and soon discovered something interesting. The man went to the corner and sat down. Again, he said in surprise that the guys were great, of course. They found a secret passage. Looking into the depths of the darkness, he wondered if it could be that they had been using it for a long time. What was scary, however, was how long the claw marks were. This only meant that they had grown considerably over the last 7 years. Remfry looked at the bag of purification stones and decided that one stone would definitely not be enough. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a loud scream that was coming from nearby. At that moment, Mr. Winter tore from his place and began to run closer, because he understood that most likely it was Her Highness who was screaming. And indeed, Remfry's voice did not fail him, because as he ran closer, he saw Madame Celine's silhouette more clearly. As soon as the man came closer, he extended his hand to our heroine, and she only looked at the knight in surprise. Of course, she extended her hand in response, saying that he saved her life, because she was on the edge, and in this darkness she could not discern anything at all. However, she hoped that they would tell her how to get out if they played together. Remfry even staggered at these words. "What do you mean, play?" Our heroine looked at the knight in the same surprised way, and said that she was not alone here. There were a couple of children about 7 years old with her. Selina hoped that she could find a way out while they were playing, but suddenly he came. At this point, Remfry interrupted Madame Selina, saying that she was getting something mixed up. Our heroine immediately stopped. Mr. Winter sighed heavily, after which he said that there was no one else in this place. Our heroine was even more surprised by these words, so she asked for an explanation, but Remfry only said that he would explain everything to her later. The first thing he decided to do was get out of here as quickly as possible and then talk. By a funny coincidence, it was at that moment that those same two dragons appeared behind the man. Remfry staggered back in horror, but his voice was still firm. He asked Madame to hold on to him, but Selina didn't understand what he was talking about, because they were just kids, so she took a step forward. The man, even more perplexed, shouted and asked the lady not to approach them, because it was very dangerous. Our heroine came up and started asking the children not to be afraid, because everything was fine, so she asked them to come closer. At this point, the so-called monsters calmed down and began to calmly approach closer. A moment later, two children emerged from the darkness. Erhi and Irene happily hugged Selina. Mr. Winter could have used a chair at that moment, because he was about to fall. He couldn't figure out if he was really imagining things. However, he decided for sure that there had just been monsters in front of him. Looking at the happy children and Selina, he said that no vision could be so alive. Erhi at that moment asked our heroine if she would look for them. Only then did a loud noise suddenly sound behind them, so they decided to turn around. The Knight Captain Siegfried was kneeling before them. The man decided to introduce himself, after which he said that he was completely at the service of the master and mistress. Having heard the words about the master and mistress, our heroine fell into a stupor and did not even know how to react. Looking at Sir Winter and then at the children, she asked in surprise if these children were Killian's nephews. Remfry started shaking his head, saying that he was completely confident in his words because they are too similar to their parents. Mr. Kirshen and his wife suddenly appeared before Remfry's eyes. Our heroine, in turn, began to examine Irene, thinking that they really were a bit similar to Killian. But most of all, she was sure of this thought when she looked at Erhi, because he was like a small copy of Killian, his raised jaw and thick dark eyebrows, and even that slightly arrogant look. However, she began to scratch Erhi's head, thinking that he was certainly much cuter than Killian. Remfry looked at her ladyship in surprise and asked if she really hadn't seen any monsters. Our heroine looked at him in surprise and said that there were only children there. The man at that very moment staggered and said that Mrs. Kilina seemed to have just performed a miracle. Nevertheless, our heroine hugged the children and asked in surprise what the knight was talking about, because she had not done anything so incredible. But Remfry in turn said that he was sure and he saw everything. As soon as Mrs. Selena hugged them, the children stopped being monsters. A fleeting spark passed through Selena. Was what Remfry had said true? Erhi and Irene were monsters before her embrace, but soon turned into children? And what's more, it was even interesting. Isn't it strange that guys are generally seen as monsters when they are so cute? Our heroine raised her head and decided to ask Remfry what these monsters looked like. The man began to list. Dark beasts with the wings of a bat, the tail of a lizard, the body of a reptile, and the claws of a bird of prey. Selena, hearing such a description of the monster, immediately realized that it was a dragon. All these thoughts lead only to the fact that that very night, she saw not a terrible dragon, but Irene and Erhi. In any case, Remfry got down on one knee and started saying that he was incredibly glad that her ladyship was okay. Our heroine laughed, but soon apologized for making us worry about her. Remfry said that everything was fine, and then looked away, saying that he would look for a way out, although in this darkness, it would not be so easy to do so. However, at that very moment, as if a salvation, a child's ringing voice was heard behind them. Irene extended her hand to our heroine, saying that she knew where the exit was, so she could show her. After some time, they were already crawling out of the same secret passage that Sir Winter had discovered earlier. As soon as our heroine got to her feet, she looked around the room and screamed in horror when she saw a strange woman lying on the floor. Of course, she asked what was wrong with her and if she was okay at all, to which Remfry said that she shouldn't worry. The girl was sleeping because of the sleeping herb. The man turned his gaze to her ladyship and explained that she was Mrs. Irene and Erhi's nanny. Okay, that was one less question, but our heroine was also interested in where the rest of the servants were. Remfry explained that no one else went to the annex except her. Only he, Hans, and his lordship were allowed to visit this place. Our heroine screamed in bewilderment, asking if even the servants of the duchy didn't know that the children were alive. Remfry responded by making excuses, saying that it was all for their own good, since everyone else saw children as horrible monsters. But when rumors start to spread that monsters are roaming the estate, or worse, that the heirs of the Seyfried house are these monsters, our heroine finished Remfry's thought, realizing that the very existence of the house could be at risk. Looking at Sir Winter, the girl asked if she understood everything correctly. The man only began to shake his head sadly. Nevertheless, the girl sighed heavily, because she did not understand how it was possible to treat children so badly. In any case, she decided to ask why they were born as monsters in the first place. Was this really a curse? Remfry looked at her in surprise and asked if she really thought so. Our heroine immediately said that it was the first thing that came to her mind. Then the girl turned her gaze to the children, not understanding what this information could lead her to, because what could be done with it? She understood that she couldn't help in any way, so she just had to watch how this situation would develop. Soon, Selena said that they were probably tired of waiting, so she suggested moving the nanny to the bedroom and going back. Remfry nodded, but our heroine thought that now she knows about children, so she will no longer have to play the stupid girl. Selena leaned towards Erhi and Irene and said that she had to go now, but she would be back. Irene, however, asked to play a little more. Our heroine sighed heavily and said that, unfortunately, she had to go, because they were waiting for her outside. The surprising thing is that not only Irene was upset, but also Erhi, because even he was not so angry anymore. The guy asked if she promised to come to them again. Our heroine scratched his head, laughed, and then promised again that she would return soon. After some time, Selena finally returned back to the palace. The first thing she saw was Lily, who was running to her mistress in tears. She cried and said that she had already thought about the worst thing, that something terrible had happened to her. Our heroine calmed Lily and said that she had returned almost immediately. The maid wiped away her tears in confusion and asked what Selena was talking about, because she had been gone for 4 days. That's why she had time to come up with different scenarios. Of course, our heroine was perplexed by this information, so she asked again. Soon she began to turn her head and realized something else. For some reason, Killian had not come out to meet her. Our heroine approached the butler and asked this question, but he could not answer it right away. And yet, with a heavy sigh, Hans said that his lordship and his detachment had gone to look for her on the snowy plains 4 days ago. But there was no need to worry, because as soon as they found out about Selena, they sent him a letter about her return. So Killian should be back soon. At this point, our heroine was as surprised as she could be. She asked Hans again if Killian had really gone to the snowy plains to find her. She decided to ask again just in case, to make sure that the words were true, because in the novel, Killian didn't care at all about Selena. The woman was surprised, so she said that this is how it should be, that the husband went to get his wife. Following these words, she said something that finally shocked our heroine. According to her, Selena is very much appreciated in the Seyfried house. Our heroine remembered what was what, so she agreed with this, saying that she was the lady of the house of Seyfried. It was no wonder why Killian went to look for her. Soon the action takes us to the hall, where only Selena, Hans, Remfry, and the headmaid were sitting. Our heroine assumed that everyone already knew what happened in the annex. Hans nodded his head, giving a positive answer. Selena added that the three of them had been serving Killian the longest, so she wanted to know something. Taking the tea in her hands, our heroine thought that right now she had a good opportunity to ask about plot points not described in the novel. She also wanted to know what they thought about her strange power. Until Killian returned, of course. The girl decided to ask who else knew about the children besides them. Hans responded by saying that the elders of the house also know about them. At the moment, this includes Count Adler Seyfried of Argent Castle, also known to Count Heinz Seyfried of Castle Caden, and Marquis Raymond Seyfried of Castle Axen. Of these, only Count Adler Seyfried, the Duke's uncle, knows that Lady Irene and Erhi are alive. Selena then asks who the brave nanny from the annex is. The woman answered, saying that the girl was from the Gilrod family. Her voice was calm, as was she, as if she had said nothing surprising. In turn, our heroine asked in surprise what kind of family this was. Instantly, a gloomy silence fell over the room, and all eyes turned to Selena. Of course, the girl remembered who it was, as if with a snap of her finger, and said that she understood. Obviously, she should know about them, but still, she will need to find out from Lily. Soon after, the woman decided to ask our heroine something else. She looked into Selena's eyes and asked if she was truly capable of manifesting the souls of the young lord and lady. Our heroine was confused by this question. What does it mean to show souls? She immediately directed her gaze towards Remfry, who guiltily turned away. In any case, an answer had to be given. The girl squeezed her teacup and said that she didn't really know the answer to that question. She really saw them as people, but she doesn't believe that she is capable of such a thing. At that very moment, Remfry jumped up and hit the table, asking Madame how she could even say such a thing. The man said that he saw everything with his own eyes. Lady Irene and Lord Erhi turned into people as soon as she touched them. Looking at Hans and the headmaid, Remfry continued, saying that if they did not believe him, then he swears on his honor that he was not lying. The woman was, of course, surprised, but said that she was sure that Sir Winter would not deceive them. But it all sounded too incredible, so it took time to accept this fact. However, a joyful Remfry turned to our heroine and said that true destiny had brought her to the house of Seyfried. Our heroine laughed, saying that she herself wanted to say about all this, so everything is fine. Looking at Hans and Anna, Selena asked if they would like to verify the veracity of this fact themselves. Instantly, they started shaking their heads, saying that it was impossible, absolutely impossible. Our heroine said in surprise that they were just going there and back. Hans responded by saying that no one was allowed to enter the annex without the Duke's permission. Selena, in turn, said that there were no monsters there, but ordinary children, and they looked like Killian. But the butler stood his ground. He said the Duke would soon return, and when he gave permission, they would be glad to go with her. Soon the action takes us to the next day. Our heroine sighed heavily, thinking that everyone was saying the cat's away, the mice will play. But Selena understood that they were somehow too afraid of the departed cat, which meant that she would have to go alone. At that moment, Anna came up to our heroine and said that she had brought her the cookies she had asked to bake. Selena smiled and thanked her. As the woman handed the basket to Selena, she assumed that these were cookies for children. The girl said that they were, and she hoped that they would like them. Then our heroine opened the basket and thought that she was absolutely sure that they would like something. At that moment, Remfry came up to them and asked Madame if she was really going to the annex. Our heroine nodded and said that she had promised the children to come. To Selena's surprise, Sir Winter was delighted and, moreover, supported this idea, so he offered to go with her. After a while, the action takes us to the forest. Selena addressed the man and said that he could rest under this tree. The man responded by saying that if he felt an excess of magic, he would come immediately. Selena smiled and said that he should not worry about it, because he himself had seen everything yesterday. So, after a couple of moments, the girl began to open the gate to come to the guys, but right next to her, she heard a strange noise coming from the bushes. However, she didn't have time to do anything, because a moment later, Erhi and Irene jumped out from there. Selena was more than surprised, so she asked the children what they were doing there. After shaking the dust off them, she also wondered why they were crawling underground when they could go out the door. Irene, in turn, reminded them that they had been told not to go out the door. Our heroine was very surprised and upset at the same time, because even though they don't have leashes, they are absolutely no different from animals in a cage. Looking at the annex where the children live, Selena asked if they could be treated better. Were these monsters really that scary? However, Erhi interrupted her bad thoughts, who asked our heroine in surprise what interesting things she had brought. The girl said that she had asked to bake cookies for them. The most surprising thing was that both Erhi and Irene asked in bewilderment what a cookie was. Of course, this question left our heroine stumped, causing her to ask in surprise if they had never eaten cookies. She immediately imagined in her head that the children were eating something else, like monsters, for example. How creepy. Well, in any case, she decided to move away from these thoughts and offered Eri and Irene to try the cookies anyway. She held out her hands. The children immediately began to try the food that Selena brought. Our heroine was pleased that at least they did not spit it all out. Soon they ate their cookies and immediately started talking about how delicious they were, which meant they wanted more. Selena was prepared for these words because she had brought a lot of cookies for them. Opening the basket, she asked them to help themselves. At this moment, our heroine turned her head and asked the children where their nanny was right now. Irene paused from eating and said that Royana was currently praying, so they had time to go for a walk. Our heroine was surprised by this. Was that girl really praying in the middle of the day? Of course, she was surprised not by the fact that she was praying, but by the fact that she was praying even though she should be looking after the children. Selena, of course, asked why she was doing this, but Irene said she didn't know, and Erhi gave the same answer. They asked, but she didn't answer them. Our heroine was upset because Royana is their only nanny, so she needs to take better care of the kids. However, at that moment, Irene approached our heroine and asked Selena not to tell their nanny that they had gone outside. Selena was very surprised by this request, so she asked why it was necessary. Would Royana really punish them for this? Irene started to speak, but Eri interrupted her and said that their nanny would start crying and apologizing, and would also be afraid of them. These words were definitely strange. How could she not only start crying, but also be afraid? There were only more questions. However, Irene approached our heroine and asked Selena if she would come to them tomorrow. The girl hugged Irene and said that she would only be happy to come and visit them. But for some reason, she had the feeling that she was sinking deeper and deeper to the bottom, from which she would never be able to swim out. After a while, Remfry happily said that, seeing all this not for the first time, it was still amazing. The transformation of the young master from a monster into a strong youth. Sir Winter told our heroine that she was undoubtedly sent by fate itself to save the house of Siegfried. Selena laughed nervously and said that she did not think so, and indeed it would be strange, because in the novel, Selena met only a cruel end. At that moment, Lily ran up to them. The maid started saying that she had already searched for her. Where had he disappeared to again? The head maid, of course, said that Sir Winter had gone with her, but she was still scared. Our heroine apologized and said that next time she would definitely let us know if she went somewhere. Lily started nodding her head and saying that it was right. Lily looked at the basket and asked what it was for. She also noticed that it smelled like cookies. Our heroine laughed and said that she had arranged a small picnic. At that moment, Lily began to blush and look surprised. Remfry and Selena looked at her in surprise. A moment later, the maid's question burst out, and she asked if she was really having an affair with Sir Winter. Remfry started laughing, and Selina turned into a tomato from such questions. So she slapped Lily on the head and asked what kind of nonsense this was. Lily, perplexed, said that she, of course, may not be married, but she is the same age as her, which means she knows a lot. Also, usually the lady constantly asks her something, but in such situations she treats her like a child. Selina began to see Lily off and say that she would not know what she would do without her. By the way, since the topic had already reached this point, our heroine decided to ask what she knew about the Gilrod family. Lily asked again in surprise, and our heroine said that she didn't remember well what she had been told about them. The maid sighed and said that it was not surprising, since the Grand Duke had told them not to talk much about anything that mentioned monsters. Selina was surprised, so she asked if the Gilrod family was related to them. Lily smiled and said that it was true. If she spoke about them, she would most likely speak about monsters. The entire Gilrod family consists of divine warriors who have served the goddess Havina for generations. When her temple was destroyed, the family scattered in all directions. Selina wanted to know everything, so next she asked who destroyed their temple. Lily immediately started to turn her head from side to side, as if they were being followed. Then she told Madame that it was better not to talk about such things with anyone. Even more interested, Selina asked why this was so, to which the maid replied that the people of the empire might condemn her for this. Nevertheless, she began the story. The north was once a fertile land ruled by Havina, but one day, the goddess became angry and covered the entire north with ice. She also created monsters to punish people. Of course, our heroine was interested in the main question: why did this happen? Opening the door, Lily said that everyone thought that it was Havina's usual whim. One way or another, it is impossible to understand what God's intention was, but the result was the same. The northern lands were covered with snow and ice. Our heroine sighed bitterly and looked down. But is everything really that simple? For such a severe insult, there must definitely be a reason for who caused her anger. And then a thought flashed through her mind: to be fed to monsters, or to become monsters themselves. Erhi and Irene appeared in her thoughts. So that's how it is. This is the curse of the goddess Havina. Our heroine opened new doors for herself, or rather, finally received answers to her questions. Lily, who hadn't been listening to Selina very much, asked what she had just said, to which our heroine replied that it was nothing that important. Anyway, she hugged Lily and thanked her for telling her everything. Taking all the things in her hands, the maid said that Selina could call her if she needed anything. Soon after, the door to Selina's room closed, and the girl began to think. If she understood correctly, the north had once been fertile lands. Looking at the view from the window, this fact was truly astonishing. I was also curious, what did this house do to incur God's wrath? At that very moment, an incomprehensible voice turned to Selina and said that she was glad to see that at least someone was trying to figure out the situation, which meant that she was not stupid. Of course, our heroine began to turn her head in bewilderment, trying to see someone, but she did not find anyone. Whose voice is this if there is no one here? And again the voice was heard, saying that choosing her was indeed a good decision. The unknown sphere in the room spoke to Selina. Following these words, the sphere began to materialize from light into water, and then into a silhouette. The real Havina appeared before our heroine and said that she had summoned her. The divine being took on his true form and told the girl that he had given her the power to lift the curse on the Seafried house. Havina was very happy that they could finally have a normal conversation, but our heroine did not believe her words, so she asked in surprise if she really was the goddess Havina. The woman's face changed, and she said that this formulation sounded quite rude towards her. Her powers may not be so great now, but she assured us that they were not so insignificant that there was any reason to doubt her. Looking at Havina's transformation, our heroine was speechless. She didn't know what to say. In any case, she decided that it was better not to anger her. Selina bowed and apologized for her rudeness. It was just unexpected for her. The deity replied that the main thing now was that she knew everything. Then our heroine decided to ask the goddess lady if she was the one who called her into this world, no matter how long she thought about it. But as she was losing consciousness, she definitely heard someone's voice. Havina answered in the affirmative. She said that the girl was called by her. The goddess also said that the owner of this body died of a heart attack after their first wedding night. This is information that Selena was very surprised to hear. Havina explained that the previous owner of this body was so nervous that she drank a lot of alcohol, passed out, and died. She also added that if she had been even a little late, she would have had to wait another couple of 100 years. Our heroine decided to ask if Hana was dead too, since her soul was here. Once again, Havina responded positively. She took the girl's soul before it disappeared and revived Selena. In that case, Selena was interested in something else. Why did they decide to choose her? Havina suddenly said that with her current amount of strength, it was difficult for her to even maintain this appearance. The goddess then turned to Selena and said that she would transfer the rest of her powers to her for now. Our heroine certainly didn't expect this answer, so she asked again, to which Havina said that she needed to accept everything that had happened, but if she had any questions, it would be better to ask the girl from the Gilrod family. Once again, Havina's form began to change. The goddess said that her powers were too unstable right now, so it was too early to use them. Taking Selena's hand, she added that she was not ready yet either. Of course, the girl didn't understand what the words "not ready" meant, so she asked him to explain them. Havina replied that her will to lift Siegfried's curse was not yet strong enough, but, in any case, they will see each other again soon. A moment later, the goddess disappeared. Our heroine immediately asked herself one question. Are all gods so daring? What does her will mean? The action shifts to the next morning. Selena has just woken up, and the first thing she thinks about is that she definitely needs to see Roina. Soon her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Then a voice came from behind the door, telling Madame that Anna had come to see her. Our heroine asked her to come in. Entering the room, the woman asked the girl in surprise if she had slept badly. She usually doesn't get up that early. Chelina replied that she had simply woken up earlier than usual, nothing special. A couple of minutes later, they got dressed, and Selena said that she needed to go to the outbuilding, so she asked Anna to distract Lily for a couple of hours. The woman nodded and then asked if there were any other requests. Selena said that in her office there was a doll that Lily had bought yesterday. She would like to have it. The head maid, of course, assumed that it was for children, to which our heroine nodded her head and said that she had noticed that the doll in the annex was already quite worn out. Then Anna, in a quieter voice, asked to tell what the children looked like. Selena was glad that she was also interested in this. The girl said that Erhi looks just like Killian, and Irene has pink hair. She likes the girl. She is very pretty when she smiles, and the dimple on her cheek is very cute. Anna picked up on these words and said that it sounded like Irene took after her mother. She explained that she also had a dimple when she smiled, and she was beautiful. Our heroine immediately approached Anna and told her that as soon as Killian returned, she would ask him for permission, and together they would go look at the children. The girl then asked the maid if she knew Royena, to which Anna replied in the affirmative. She did not know her. The Gilrod devote themselves entirely to their role as divine warriors, so they have little contact with humans. They believe this impairs their ability to hear the god they serve. Selena said that she heard that the previous duke had called Royena here personally. Anna nodded and said that it was true. Moreover, she added that he left a will in which he asked her to look after the children until the curse was lifted. Selena said in surprise that leaving the children completely with a girl when they know nothing about her is very strange. Anna sighed and said that she shared these feelings with her and completely understood. At first, they all had their doubts too. Even his lordship visited them several times a day, just to make sure that the children were safe. Selena was surprised and asked if Anna was talking about Killian now. However, the woman was also surprised by this reaction, because it was known to everyone, because they were the children of his elder brother, the former duke. At that very moment, a knight ran into the room, calling Madame Selena. The guy said that a message had already arrived, that his lordship was now at the northern gate. Panic immediately broke out in the duchy. Anna was thinking about what kind of meat to cook. His lordship had been eating dried meat for the last few days, so it would be good to stew it and add some soft vegetables. Other maids ran to fill the hot bath. Others went to clean. Of course, the head maid supervised the girls' coordinated work. At this time, our heroine feels guilty for the first time, and since she came here, the mistress of the house should be doing all this. At that moment, Hans approached Selina and told Madame that he had been informed that Sir Winter and the healers had just left for the outer gates. The girl asked if Killian was hurt, to which the butler replied that, fortunately, nothing serious had happened, but one of the knights was badly hurt. Of course, our heroine asked if she could do anything for them. Hans in turn began to see her off and say that they would make preparations, so she could wait it all out in her room. Soon the butler was called by one of his assistants, which meant that help was needed elsewhere. The man turned to Selina and wished her a pleasant rest, and he himself went on to sort out a pile of work. Our heroine climbed up and watched all the chaos. She also thought about how Killian got hurt because of her recklessness, which was terrible. However, Hans said that he was not seriously injured, but still the girl still could not tear herself away from bad thoughts. As she approached the door, she stood up and shook her head, thinking that she should stop beating herself up, because nothing could be fixed. Suddenly, our heroine's thoughts were interrupted by an incomprehensible roar that came from the room next door. The girl turned her head in confusion, trying to guess what it was, but from the sound, it seemed like a window had broken. Walking up to the door, she pulled the handle, but began to pray that it wasn't what she thought it was. Entering inside, the girl saw two happy children on the floor. Erhi and Irene greeted Selina with a smile on their faces. To say that our heroine was in shock is to say nothing, because she froze for a couple of seconds. Soon she slammed the door shut, then ran up to the boys and gestured that they needed to be very quiet. Then Selina started scolding them, saying that she told them she would come. Erhi folded his arms and said that he was trying to hold her back. Irene smiled and said they understood, but they assumed it was hard for her to come all the time herself, so it was their turn. Our heroine was, of course, in shock, but still decided to ask how they got here in the first place. The boys looked at the girl in bewilderment, as if the answer was already clear, but they still said that they got there with the help of wings. Selina asked again and immediately thought about it. Sir Winter said that children looked like monsters to him. In that case, they probably seem the same to other people. But if that's the case, our heroine immediately realized that all people would now feel the aura of monsters. Immediately from the street came the cries of people who were looking at the broken window and said that this was the floor where Her Highness's chambers were. A real panic began. They began to find out where the guards were, and also ordered us to quickly go there and find out what had happened. The action, meanwhile, takes us to the outer gate. Remfry and the other guards were meeting his lordship. Killian nodded his head and told Sir Winter that he was glad he had brought the healers. Turning his head, he pointed at Hakin and said that he was injured and needed to be examined. Remfry was of course worried about his knight, so he asked what had happened. Killian replied that they had been ambushed while searching for the Havina temple. The man asked again in bewilderment, and his lordship continued to say that a stone column had fallen on Hakin, and they could not stop it in any way. However, Remfry said he was glad Killian was okay. His lordship then changed the subject and asked if Kalina was really back safe. Sir Winter smiled and said that she was still as whole as when he last saw her. Killian breathed a sigh of relief and suggested that she might have just been lucky not to run into them, otherwise he would have been scared. The guy then asked Remfry if Selina had told him why she had entered the underpass. The question took him by surprise, but he decided not to show it and said that she went there out of curiosity. Killian sensed the false words, so he asked again. Remfry replied that the estate was still large, so she had accidentally ended up there. Only Killian already felt exactly when Remfry was lying and when he was telling the truth, so he told him not to even try to deceive him. The guy asked him what he was trying to hide, and all those thoughts from that very passage instantly popped up in Remfry's head. Still, he decided to say that the dragons the Duchess had seen were indeed the young lord and lady, or rather, she didn't know what they looked like. Killian asked again with a crazy look. Did the children really run out of the annex and come to Selina? Sir Winter said that it was so. Killian immediately seized his horse and prepared to run. A moment later, the guy rushed forward, and Remfry began to try to stop him. Following the fleeing boy, Remfry said that the Duchess has a power that prevents them from harming her. He continued to say that he had seen everything with his own eyes. From monsters, they became ordinary children. In turn, Killian was sure that this was nonsense. For hundreds of years, not a single head of the house had found a way to lift the curse, not even his brother. Could some daughter of a great duke, not related to them by blood, have done it? The guy was sure that an ordinary young girl who doesn't even know who monsters are can't do this. It's impossible. Meanwhile, in the duchy, a nightmare was happening for Cielina and the children, as people were knocking on their door and asking to open the door. The girl asked Hans to calm down, saying that everything was fine. So why all the fuss? The man asked in bewilderment how she could feel good if he could sense the aura of monsters. Hans decided not to believe the lady's words, so he turned to his assistant and ordered him to call the knights. The boy immediately ran to carry out the order. Our heroine understood that she wouldn't be able to hold the door for long, so she needed to barricade herself. She instantly threw everything off the table. The vase broke, but she didn't care. She started moving the table towards the door. Of course, Hans also reacted to the noise from inside, so he started asking Madame if she was hurt. The girl said that everything was fine. Cielina understood that everything was bad, but she also understood that the children needed to be protected. So after closing the curtains, she told the children that everything would be fine. Irene asked if Cielina would definitely protect them, to which our heroine said that she was next to them, so they could not worry. To herself, she thought that Hans and Anna were not a problem. But if Killian found out that the children had left the annex without permission, he would be very angry. At that moment, the knight's voice began to be heard on the other side of the door, saying that if they did not open the door themselves, they would have to break it down. Our heroine hugged Irene to herself, and in response to the knight's words, said that they could try to do as they wanted, but then they would never set foot in the estate again. Instantly, everyone became quiet, because they understood that they couldn't overdo it either. For our heroes, this was only a plus, because they could breathe a little easier. However, one question remained. Cielina turned to Hans and asked where Killian was now. The man said that he would only receive the message recently, so now he— At that very moment, Hans's words were interrupted by an incredibly angry and loud voice, which asked what was going on here. It was obviously Killian who was talking about feeling the aura of monsters from the room, so why hasn't anyone entered there yet? The guy started to guiltily talk about how the Duchess was threatening them, so— Killian asked in bewilderment if they really decided to put her in danger. Soon Killian shouted, telling everyone to disperse, because he himself was coming in. At this time, Irene's body seemed to be pierced by 1,000 sparks. The girl turned to her brother and asked if he had heard that voice outside. Irene was becoming more and more anxious with each passing second. Tears wouldn't stop flowing from her eyes, and the reason for that was that Killian had come. Cielina, equally perplexed, approached the girl and wanted to try to calm her down, but Irene pushed Cielina away and started telling her that she shouldn't be approached now. Our heroine was a little scared and excited, because the girl's golden eyes instantly turned red. Looking at the girl as if she was going crazy, Cielina assumed that this was exactly what Remfry was talking about. The action takes us back some time. At night, our heroine looked at strange stones on the building and asked what it was. Sir Winter responded by saying that these were purification stones that absorbed the aura of monsters. The aura of monsters and the magical power of people, by the way, are similar. Both are emitted if they are manifested or their owner is enraged. Cielina said in surprise that she had never seen Irene or Erhi use their powers before. The man said that this precaution was needed not so much against the use of force, but in case of rage. Cielina, of course, asked what happens when they are angry. Remfry at first didn't even know how to explain it to her, if to her they look like normal children. After thinking for a bit, he started to think about the factors, and the first thing that came to his mind was, of course, red eyes. This is exactly what happened now with Irene, who could not find a place for herself. At this time, Erhi also understood that things were bad, because his sister was not feeling well. The guy started calling Cielina. The guy wanted to say something, but he was too worried, which is why he himself began to suffer from incomprehensible pain. Our heroine felt as if she was trapped, because looking at the children whom she could not help, she did not even know what to do. But that wasn't the worst thing that could happen. You could say that it was the very beginning. At that very moment, Killian started to knock on the door, ordering the door to be opened for him. The guy shouted and said that if she really thought that there were children standing in front of her, even despite this aura, then she was very much mistaken. Irene, meanwhile, seemed to go crazy with each passing second. The girl began to scream in horror and asked to get away from her. A moment later, wings appeared involuntarily from behind the girl. Erhi was horrified and tried to stop his sister. The worst thing for Selena was that even the boy began to lose his temper, because now the cheeks were visible on his cheeks. The girl began to try to approach him to calm him down, but at that moment, the guy raised his head. Now his eyes were just as red, and he asked her not to come closer. Selena was at a dead end. She didn't know what to do, because Irene's rage had affected her brother too. A moment later, Erhi fell to the ground. It seemed that he fell quickly and easily, but the impact was so strong that the floor beneath him cracked. Soon something terrible began to happen. The aura of monsters was everywhere in the room. At some point, the two previously small children appeared before Selena as monsters. But with the last of his strength, Erhi begged her to run away from here. Our heroine was stunned. She seemed to have turned to stone and didn't know what to do. She couldn't leave them. However, time was running out, because everything was leading to the children dying if people broke in. It was at this moment that Havina seemed to sense our heroine's need for help, so she appeared and said that she just needed to hug the children. Of course, Selena was shocked, but the girl said that her divine power was flowing in Selena's body, which meant she shouldn't be afraid. Meanwhile, the children were no longer children. Even Erhi, who literally just talked to our heroine, looked more like a monster. But Selena, at that moment, was still standing, not knowing whether she should believe the words of the deity or not. Havina approached again. She decided to hurry the girl, because if she didn't hug the children, Killian would burst in and kill them. Will she let that happen? Obviously, she did not want this outcome at all, and so at that very moment she ran towards the huge creature and hugged him. The monster was also shocked by this, because something strange began to happen to him. His skin began to change, and at that moment, Sir Winter helped to knock down the door. A bright yellow light illuminated all the people who stood in front of the door. Of course, Killian wasn't going to stand still, so he immediately ran forward. Remfry tried to leave him, but of course it was in vain. His lordship finally entered and began to scan the room with his eyes, trying to spot the monsters, but inside sat Selena, who was hugging Irene, and next to her was Erhi, who was helping to bring his sister to her senses. Our heroine raised her head and began to look cautiously at the shocked Killian, who was coming closer and closer to them. Holding the children close to her, the girl said that these children are not dangerous when she holds them. The guy came closer and soon sat down on one knee, looking at the guys. He didn't say a word. His actions were strange and a little scary, so our heroine tried to get at least a word out of him. Killian used his hand to straighten a strand of Irene's hair and stroked her head. He slowly sank into his thoughts. He remembered his brother talking about leaving his children with him. Kirshen understood that both he and his wife had suffered because of them, but they were still his beloved children. At that moment, Killian turned his head and began to thank Selena in a barely audible voice. The girl looked at him closely and noticed that he could not hold back his tears. One by one, the tears rolled down his cheeks and fell on the floor, and the guy continued to thank the girl. The action takes us to the next day. As soon as the sun rose, Irene and Erhi began to wake up. In the room, our heroine called out to them, opening the curtains and asking the children if they had slept well. To say that the children were shocked is to say nothing. Selena, in turn, laughed and forestalled their questions, saying that they were in her room and no one would enter without permission. In any case, Irene felt guilty, so she decided to ask Selena if she had hurt herself then. Our heroine continued to speak with a smile on her face. She reassured the girl, saying that she was not hurt at all. Soon the girl hugged the children and asked them for forgiveness for breaking her promise. From that moment on, she promised to keep every promise she made. Irene asked if that meant she would visit them more often, to which Selena replied that it was true. She would see them more often. She also promised to find a way for them to come visit her. The girl, based on experience, began to get nervous and say that if they came, something bad could happen again. Of course, Selena reassured her again and asked her not to worry, because nothing would happen. She would make sure that Killian did not harm them. Our heroine, in turn, understood that the children were sure that Killian wanted to harm them. Even the pronunciation of his name scared them so much. The girl didn't want the children to go through that fear again. In any case, her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Anna, who had come with news. The woman said their breakfast was ready. Ari and Irene were hiding under the blanket, but showed their desire to eat. Selena laughed and said that everything was fine. She would bring them breakfast. The girl left the room and told Anna that she had arrived just in time, because the children had just woken up. After that, she turned her gaze to the tray and realized that this food was not enough for 3 people. Selena raised her head and asked in surprise if she had mentioned preparing food for the children, too. Anna lowered her head in embarrassment and tried to say something, but at that moment, Sir Winter called out to them, apologizing for his lateness. Our heroine asked him in surprise what brought him here early in the morning. In response, he held out a bag. Remfrey said that his lordship had learned that she was going to breakfast with the young lord and lady, so he asked her to make preparations. While Selena looked at the bag in bewilderment, Anna told Sir Winter that she had forgotten to prepare portions for the children, and he had to do it for her. The man smiled and said that nothing terrible had happened, because this was the knight's job anyway. At that moment, our heroine interrupted them and asked what it was. Remfrey untied the bag and said that these were A-rank magic stones that had been dug up less than a week ago. Now this news was definitely strange. Selena didn't understand anything. What kind of food was this? After some time, Remfrey came to Killian, who was asking if Selena was scared. The man said that she was surprised at first, but quickly calmed down. His lordship turned and asked in surprise if she had really calmed down. Sir Winter thought for a moment and said that he thought it was all because she was finally able to feed the young lord and lady well, since before that they had only eaten cookies. However, their conversation was interrupted. There was a knock on the door, and soon a voice on the other side of the door made it clear that it was Hans. The butler came in and was even glad that Sir Winter was there. In any case, he informed her that her ladyship had finished preparing for the trip to the annex. The man nodded his head and told his lordship that he would go and escort her. Soon the man left the room, and Hans turned to his lordship and said that it all looked like a waking dream. He shared his joy when, passing by Selena's room, he heard ringing laughter. The question immediately followed. If the curse on Lord Erhi and Lady Irene had been lifted, then the danger had passed? He assumed that he no longer needed to worry, that Killian would suffer the same fate as Kirschian. At that moment, the boy asked the butler to stop, because he said that he would not die. But Hans responded to these words just as sharply, saying that Mr. Kirschian had also told him. The man explained his worries by saying that he does not want to lose another head of the Seyfried family. Killian nodded his head in understanding and said that everything was fine, at least for now. The last words were of course a little confusing, so Hans asked what it meant. Killian asked the butler if he had forgotten that Erhi and Irene were above him as candidates for the position of leader. The man didn't even know what to say. The butler wanted to object, but Killian interrupted him, saying that this role was originally intended for them. They would no doubt inform the elders that Erhi and Irene were alive. That's why the guy understood that they would most likely start discussing candidates once suitable heirs were found. Hans couldn't answer this, so he just lowered his head with a sad face. The butler decided to change the subject, so he asked whether the Duchess should be assigned a guard. Looking at Killian's confused face, he said that he felt that with the news of Erhi and Irene's return, it was a necessary measure since Sir Winter couldn't be with them forever. Nevertheless, the Duke opened the drawer and took out sheets of paper with questionnaires, saying that he was just about to assign a faithful knight to the little ladies and the Duke. Meanwhile, the action takes us to our heroine and the children. Irene, holding Selena's hand, asked if she could let go of it. Our heroine turned her head, to which Sir Winter smiled, saying that everything was fine. He pointed to the knights and said that they had already moved far enough away that they would not turn around. Having said that, since they were already near the extension, Selena nevertheless let go of the girl's hand. Irene nevertheless asked the Duchess to promise that she would not go home. Our heroine smiled at her and said that she had no intention of doing so. Then, to cement the promise, she decided to make a pinky promise. Irene instantly seemed to be charged with energy, walked up to the girl, extended her finger to her, and then went to Erhi. The boys then headed to the outbuilding. The boy turned to our heroine and told her that they would be back soon as the boys ran, our heroine decided to ask Remfry if the nanny knew that the children were gone all night. Sir Winter replied that, frankly, he himself did not know. He suggested that the children might have put her to sleep again, like last time. Selina was outraged. How could anyone neglect their duties like that? The indignant girl asked if she really needed to teach Royena how to work properly. After all, if it weren't for her, something would have happened here. A few seconds after thinking, our heroine was called out by a joyful Irene. Royena and Erhi were near her. Our heroine suddenly thought about it. It was so dark that night that she didn't even notice anything. She had never met anyone with silver hair and eyes before. But Remfry at that moment said that in 7 years, the girl had not changed at all. Selina asked again in surprise if it was true. Sir Winter nodded his head, saying that there was literally not a single difference. It was even strange. But maybe it was only at first glance. At this moment, Royena came closer and bowed down, telling her ladyship that she had been waiting for her. In any case, our heroine was angry. She said that she was the one waiting for her. The girl asked how it was possible not to notice the disappearance of the children, but suddenly something strange happened. Ari and Irene's nanny fell to the ground, and taking the Duchess's leg, bent over it. Of course, Selina was very embarrassed, which is why she started saying that she had no reason to do this. Nevertheless, the girl began to rise, and the first thing she said was that the goddess was waiting for her. It was obvious that Selina had many questions, at least about what her words meant, but Royena just turned around and asked him to follow her. After some time, our heroine went to get a nanny, and she left the children with Remfry. He was worried, of course, but believed that they would not harm him. The girl walked through familiar places, but still wondered. Was she really taking her to her room? Finally, she opened her door and said that they needed to come in. Then she extended her hand inside. Selina asked in confusion if Royena wanted her to come in alone. The nanny nodded her head in response to her question. So our heroine went inside anyway. She thought that the room would be more interesting, because after all, a service was being held here. But looking around, the girl only became convinced that she was completely ordinary. However, she was still able to discover something unusual. In front of her stood a glowing statue of an angel. Coming closer, she picked it up and began to examine it. Apparently, it was a Havina figurine. In fact, if she thought about it, she realized that she had never seen anyone with that eye color before. Is it just a coincidence that she and Havina have the same eyes, or is there a reason for that? At that very moment, all thoughts faded into the background, because right in our heroine's hands, the statuette began to speak. It greeted the girl. Selina, out of fear, even dropped the figurine on the ground, which of course Havina did not particularly like. The goddess took her human form and laughed, asking the girl to be more gentle with her. Our heroine at that moment was trying to catch her breath from such fear, but at the same time, she was telling Havina that she shouldn't have been scared like that. However, at that very moment, Havina hugged the girl, saying that she was very happy that Selina had exceeded all her expectations. Our heroine, surprised and even a little embarrassed, reminded that she simply did what she told her to do. Then she asked the goddess if she had called her here because she knew something like this would happen. Havina nodded her head, saying that it was all true. Our heroine responded by saying that if she just needed a body, she could have given her strength to someone else. The goddess, in turn, said that this was not so. A person was needed whose magical powers did not reject her divine ones. It turned out that the entire Grand Duchy of Kiev, of which she is a part, does not have any magic in their bodies. As a result, they decided to compensate for this deficiency by mining mana stones before anyone else, and thus gain wealth and power. However, our heroine seemed to feel that there was another reason, so she said that this was not the reason. Havina sighed heavily and became more specific. She needed someone who loved Duke Siegfried and was not going to leave him. That was the final condition. Our heroine, perplexed, began to talk about what she had already said, that she was not ready. Clutching her dress, she said that, for some reason, she felt like Havina wasn't telling her something very important. Or maybe she was wrong. However, there was no answer, which is why our heroine herself did not understand what was happening. Why was the goddess simply silent? At that moment, the girl clearly felt uneasy, and she hoped that she had not made things worse for herself. She began to take steps back, when suddenly, Havina stopped her and asked her not to be afraid. The goddess said that if she fully accepted her powers, she would be able to use them whenever she wanted and easily prevent the children from going wild. Havina held her hands, but the girl suddenly pulled away because she was confused. Looking at the goddess, the girl asked if the children had become like this because of her curse. She even screamed, saying that it should be shameful to let another person correct her actions now. Moreover, at the moment she was offering to take possession of her body, which is even stranger. Havina began to guiltily fiddle with her hands, saying that she already knew perfectly well that she was being shameless. But still, she decided to justify herself, saying that she broke the seal, even though it cost most of her strength. She really wanted to correct her mistakes. In that case, the girl told her to remove the curses now, but Havina turned around silently. The goddess said that this could not be done, because monsters would always exist. She explained this by saying that it would be simply impossible to remove their aura from the blood of the Seafried family. Our heroine was horrified and perplexed at the same time. She summed up everything she had heard by saying that, until now, Havina had simply ignored the suffering of the damned. If she wants to use her body to get rid of her guilt, then she should look for someone else. Why would she even help someone who can't be honest and doesn't know how to fix her own mistake? The goddess tried to stop the girl, saying that she was ready to plunge into eternal sleep. All her powers, all her authority, she would give to Selena. She did not need a body if the children would stop suffering from her mistake. Opening the door, our heroine told her that she should have thought about this before cursing the children. Finally, she turned around and told Havina that she had created this problem herself, so she had to solve it. The goddess asked the girl to stop, saying that this was not right. Our heroine was angry at this point, so she said that she was not going to help such a proud goddess. Realizing that Havina's plan was going down the drain, she decided to take extreme measures. So in that moment, she screamed out of desperation, saying something else. Our heroine froze like a stone at that moment. It seemed like she was just taking a step forward, but now she couldn't say a word. While Havina reminded the girl that she was only alive because of her divine powers, Kilina suddenly fell to the ground. The goddess decided to demonstrate what would happen if she took away her powers, and the answer was simple. Without them, Selena would simply die. For some time, the girl was in some kind of trance. The sphere flew around Selena and said over and over again that she lived only thanks to her powers. She concluded that the girl would simply die if she did not do what she told her to. A sudden awakening, voices nearby, bedroom. Our heroine looked around and saw Remfry and Lily in front of her. The girl began to hold her head, asking what had happened. Sir Winter, in turn, was incredibly happy that she had woken up. The man told his side. Royana called her with despair in her eyes, so he immediately went after her. But when he arrived, he found her lying unconscious on the floor. Remfry asked in bewilderment what had happened there, that she had fallen to the ground like that, and the girl only looked away. Selena said that she was probably too tired from running back and forth between the main building and the annex. Remfry said with regret that she should rest for a couple of days, but it is obvious that our heroine refused, saying that she is fine. She understood that she will not be able to see Erhi and Irene, but Lily nevertheless intervened in the conversation, and, having laid the Duchess on the pillow, said that not everything was okay. She felt that she had a fever. The maid told the Duchess that she must not go out until she was fully recovered. Hans insisted that she take good care of her so that she could have a good rest. With a heavy sigh, our heroine thanked Lily for her concern. The girl smiled and said that if she really wanted to thank her, she'd better get well soon. Selena assured her that she would be fine, so she could go and rest. She also looked at Sir Winter and sent him to rest, because he was probably very shocked. Before she went out the door, Lily asked the Duchess to promise her that she would call her if she needed anything, and so the girl was left alone with her thoughts. To be honest, what she needed now was not rest, but something else. She had hoped to calm down a little and then get a divorce, but now she realized that she couldn't do that. The action moves forward a few days. Our heroine was going to visit the guys, so she assumed that they were waiting for her, which meant she needed to take more cookies. As soon as she saw Anna, the girl asked if she could make a snack for the children. The maid asked the girl if she would really go to the annex. Selena was getting ready on the go. The girl said that she couldn't keep the children waiting. At that moment, the girl noticed that there was someone downstairs. She noticed Killian and Hans. The butler smiled and told the Duchess that he had been worried when he heard the news that morning that she had not yet woken up. However, he asked if she was feeling better. The girl said she was fine. And then Killian approached her. The guy said that considering how quickly she had recovered, the beaver blanket must have been very warm. Our heroine froze at that moment. She immediately began to dig through her thoughts, trying to remember where she heard about beaver skins. The action takes us back a bit. Lily showed the Duchess a blanket made from 20 young beaver skins. Selena was shocked and asked to take it away from her. The maid asked again in bewilderment, to which our heroine replied that the girl could keep it for herself. Lily asked the lady if she was sure about this, to which the girl nodded her head and asked her to quickly remove it from her. Our heroine realized that this blanket was specially made for her by Killian. The girl felt terrible, but she understood that she would have to lie, because how could the mistress of the house refuse her husband's gift? Selena thanked him for the blanket. As the boy climbed up the steps, the girl said that she had most likely recovered so quickly thanks to the rare beaver pelts he had found for her. At this point, the Duke extended his hand and said that he hoped she had a little time, as he would like to introduce someone to her. He asked if she was busy. He also said that it wouldn't take long. The girl said that she was not very busy. In that case, Killian asked her to go with him to his office. A couple of minutes later, they entered the Duke's office, where an unknown person was sitting. The girl immediately introduced herself to the Duchess. It was Gabriel of the Shivars Knights. Killian explained that from now on, Gabriel would be her personal bodyguard. Our heroine said in surprise that Sir Winter was enough for her. The Duke said that he had decided to do so the day he returned from the snowy outskirts, but had simply been putting it off because of other problems. Killian asked the girl if he understood correctly that she was going to continue visiting the annex. Our heroine understood what these words were leading to, so she asked in surprise if he really wanted to follow her. The girl then asked what would happen if she refused. Killian, perplexed, asked why she would refuse a bodyguard. Selena explained that the children will definitely not get out of control if they are around her, but she still wasn't 100% sure about it, so she added the word maybe at the end. That's why Killian picked up on the word, pointing out that this was why he had provided her with a bodyguard. Soon, an awkward silence fell over the room, which no one seemed to be breaking. Yet at some point, Killian broke the silence by saying that he knew she had mystical powers. In any case, they both understood that not much was known about them. There were only assumptions. He asked the girl to do as he said until they figured everything out together. Pointing to the girl, he said that Gabriel was one of the best knights in the duchy. Yes, of course. He immediately pointed out that she was not as talkative as Remfry, but she was better at picking up on subtle hints. Our heroine was even surprised. How did the Duke know that she felt uncomfortable around Remfry? But still, if Killian wants to look after her so much, then maybe he really does care about her. With a heavy sigh, the guy said that if she didn't like Gabriel, then he could find another knight. He also added that Remfry really wanted to be in her place, but at that moment, our heroine interrupted the Duke and said that everything was fine. Extending her hand, Selena said that Killian had personally confirmed Gabriel's skills, so she would feel safe under her protection. Smiling, our heroine asked Gabriel to take care of her. Selena knew that it would be better if she accepted Killian's offer. Gabriel at this moment even looked a little embarrassed, because she did not think that the Duchess would receive her so joyfully. Soon the action takes us outside. Gabriel asked to let her take the basket, which looked heavy for Selena. Our heroine smiled and said that it wasn't that hard for her. The knight sighed, but asked to tell her right away if it became hard for her. After this, they set off again, and Gabriel walked step by step behind the Duchess. To some extent, it was even embarrassing, so the girl asked a logical question. Does this really mean that she will always be next to her? The knight said that she would guard her during the day, and Sir Hakeem Jensen would guard her at night. They would work in shifts, and again there was silence. It was even unusual, because if you compare it to Remfry, it is different. Gabriel is generally taciturn, and since they will see each other every day, She would like, at least, not to feel awkward between them. At this point, the girl turned to Madame. She apologized in advance if she seemed rude, but she wanted to ask a question. Selina was only too happy about it. Gabrielle turned around and asked what was on her mind. Selina was surprised by the question, so she assumed she was talking about the children. Turning her head, the girl said that she wanted to know if she could lift the curse from them with her powers. Our heroine lowered her head in embarrassment and said that she could not give an answer because she was not sure of it. Unexpectedly, Gabrielle smiled and said that she was very pleased to hear that. Selina was shocked by this reaction, so she said that it sounded very inappropriate and rude. The girl apologized because she didn't think it would sound too rude to her. In any case, the honor of a knight obliges her not to lie. Our heroine answered her that she had already behaved rudely, so there was nowhere else to go and she should continue her thought. The girl also added that her words sounded as if she did not want the curse to be lifted from the children. Moreover, she also behaves as if she does not want to accept her as her mistress. Gabriel stood silently and stared at one point, but, at that moment, our heroine said something that made her waver. Selina said that if her thoughts were correct, she would complain to Killian, since it was he who recommended her. Gabriel immediately began to ask forgiveness from her ladyship. She could not connect a couple of words to explain her thoughts. After a few seconds, the girl finally said what she thought. The reason for her words was that she did not want his lordship's status in the family to be further endangered. Selina partially understood her words, because now Killian is the head of his house. But at the same time, as soon as the world becomes aware of the existence of these children, talk will immediately begin about them inheriting this title. Eventually, Urhi and Irene will become the heirs to the title, which is why Killian could be in danger if the curse is lifted. Looking at Gabriel, our heroine's feelings and thoughts were mixed. But one thing was clear. The girl is really very loyal to Killian. Selina sighed and said that now she understood what she meant, but added anyway that she would go alone from here. The Duchess asked Gabriel to stand there until she called her. Finally, our heroine went inside the extension, but judging by her face, it was clear that she was still actively thinking about something. The girl was so preoccupied with her own concerns that she didn't even think about what might happen when the curse was lifted. She decided that she needed to prepare, just in case. Irene and Erhi ran to meet our heroine, who smiled back at them. Of course, she brought treats, which made the children very happy, and Selina wanted the children to continue living as the Lord and Lady of House Seyfried, even if she lifted the curse. Unexpectedly, Erhi asked them to wait, and he ran upstairs. As soon as he stood on the handrail, the boy turned to Selina and asked her to watch carefully. A moment later, he jumped down, spreading his wings as he did so, allowing him to glide calmly as he descended. The guy landed and stood in a stance. He was proud of himself, just like our heroine, who praised him. Then the girl looked at the wings in surprise and assumed that they had become a little bigger. Erhi was surprised for a moment. Could she really see them? Selina smiled and said that the wings were translucent until they were fully open. But anyway, yes, she could see them. As she began to do Irene's hair, the girl thought. She didn't know if it was a good thing that she could see their wings, since Irene had lost control. Maybe it was because of Havina's power? At that moment, the girl turned to Selina, asking her if she wanted to fly. The girl thought for a moment and almost immediately answered that she would be all for it. Irene smiled and said that she would help her. But how? That was already a secret. Selina began tickling Irene, no longer trying to hide her affection. She was too cute. Then the girl raised her head, realizing that if she thought about it, then last time she had not been able to properly examine this place. But now she sees that they have everything they need here. All the toys look old, but it is clear that some effort has been made to diversify them. Irene suddenly asked the Duchess which she liked, rabbits or squirrels. Selina smiled and said that she liked rabbits quite well. Then the girl turned to her brother and asked him the same question. Erhi shrugged, saying that he liked wolves. The girl looked at their toys with a sad look and said that they don't have wolves. Erhi sighed heavily, saying that it would be boring without wolves. But still, he had some idea. They went to the bookshelves, and our heroine thought that if the previous duke had made every effort to find Rowena and bring her to the estate, then This means that he already knew in advance that his children would be born monsters. And yet, they did not lose hope. Anyway, Irene and Ari got what they wanted, so they started moving towards Selena. The boy handed over the book and asked the girl to read this book for them. Our heroine was shocked and didn't even understand what was wrong with this book. Why was it so big? Well, in any case, she decided to see what air he had found. Soon the children settled down near her, and with smiles on their faces, began to wait for the girl to start reading to them. There was silence. It seemed like enough time had passed to find the beginning, but Selena still couldn't get started. Erhi even decided to bring her to her senses by calling, but our heroine was horrified because she understood that she could not read a word. When she decided to get a divorce and gave herself up to idleness, she was tormented most by the newly minted imperial words. Lily was always bringing her papers that needed to be looked at. That's why Selena decided to put off everything connected with them and pretended to have forgotten about them. But this couldn't last forever, and it would be strange if the daughter of the Grand Duke suddenly asked for help in such a matter as learning a language. She tried to learn it on her own, but soon reached her limit. The girl knew she had to improvise. Judging by the pictures, it looked like a fencing textbook. How did a 7-year-old choose this book? Ari and Irene looked at each other in surprise, as if the agreement had just arisen inside their heads. At that moment, the boy stood up and pointed to the picture, saying that this was the hero Ihai, who was rushing to help Aaron. But Irene asked her brother to look more carefully, because here you can clearly see how Aaron runs to help poor Ihi. Apparently, the children made up the story looking at the pictures. Our heroine looked at the children and asked if they wanted to learn to read. The children asked again in surprise. The girl nodded her head and said that if they learned to read, they would be able to learn in detail about the adventures of Ihai and Aaron. Irene asked if Selena would teach them. Our heroine smiled at her and said that if they studied together, it wouldn't be boring. In fact, she wanted to study herself. In any case, the children were interested in this proposal, so they smiled and said that they agreed. Well, if that's the case, our heroine suggested that they put the book aside for now and play with dolls. There may not be a wolf here, of course, but there is a puppy. Selena began to play with the children, realizing that this time she managed to avoid reading, again. But what next? She assumed that there was also an etiquette that young lords and ladies had to learn in order to integrate into high society. But will children who grew up in a wolf-like society be able to live a normal life? She dreamed of using her divine powers as she wished. Although at that very moment, the girl shook her head, thinking that she should in no way rely on Havina. She already knew that she would do everything in her power to help the children become independent. Our heroine was more than confident that even without using divine powers, she would be able to continue to keep a smile on the children's faces. After some time, the girl finally left the room and closed the door behind her. At that moment, like a ghost, Royena came up behind Selena and called her. The girl even jumped in surprise. The nanny asked if everything was okay with the young gentleman, to which Selena replied that the children had played enough and went to bed. However, the girl also noticed that Royena's face was sad, so she decided to ask what happened. The girl fell to her knees and began to ask for help from her ladyship. Over and over again, she repeated herself. Selena didn't understand what was happening. She asked the nanny what happened and why she fell on her knees. The girl turned to her ladyship, begging her to awaken the goddess once more. Selena was surprised by her question, so she asked what she meant. Royena explained her words by saying that after the goddess spoke to Selena, she no longer contacted her. Approaching the Havana statue, our heroine asked if something like this had ever happened, to which Royena replied that the goddess had never slept for so long before. With sadness, the girl only added that it was clear that something bad had happened to Havina. Our heroine picked up her statue and began to recall their conversation. She knew for sure that the goddess had said that they had little time left. Was her life shortened because she shared her divine power with her? Or maybe because she rejected her offer? The girl turned her head towards Royena and asked if she could take the statue with her. The nanny just nodded. Selena was even a little surprised, because this is a very important thing for her. Is she sure? Royena smiled and reminded her that the goddess's chosen one stood before her, which meant she could give her the statuette. She was sure that only Selena knew how to awaken her, and besides, she could do nothing, so she would leave the goddess in her hands. Soon at sunset, our heroine finally came out of the annex, near which Gabrielle was standing. Together they went to the duchy. Suddenly, the girl noticed a whole bunch of birds in the sky, flying to one place. Taking a closer look, she turned to the knight, saying that they all looked like mailmen. Gabriel also looked at the sky, saying that it looked like that. Selena looked at her bodyguard and asked if there was really a need to send so many messages. Silence fell again. Gabriel's empty and tense gaze was even a little frightening, so our heroine tried to somehow get out a few words. Finally, the knight said that the elders had most likely made their move. It was predictable. Selena asked if they had just decided to do something, to which Gabriel replied that rumors about the young master and mistress were already actively spreading. Our heroine, of course, decided that they should not delay, so she suggested that they return back as soon as possible. Of course, Gabriel agreed with this. Sometime later, as the sun set, Killian was in his office receiving letters from pigeons. Just at that very moment, there was a knock at the door. Turning his head, he asked who was there, to which he heard a response from Selena. The girl said she had something to tell him, so she wondered if she could come in. Only after opening the door did the guy ask if Gabriel had done something wrong. Selena sighed and said that everything was fine, because as he told her, Gabriel was an excellent knight. In that case, Killian was interested in what exactly brought her to his office so late. Our heroine sat down at the chair and said that she would like to teach children to read. Will he let her do it? She explained her words by the fact that, as far as he knew, there were a lot of different books in the extension. The girl assumed that if they learned to read and write, they would be able to acquire at least some basic knowledge. Killian put his hand to his chin and stared at one point. He didn't even know what to say to that. Selena even thought for a moment that he, too, did not want the curse to be lifted from the children due to the potential loss of the ducal title. However, her hand was firmly clutching the dresses. The girl refused to believe this theory. She knew that if that were the case, he wouldn't have had that expression on his face when he saw the children in their true form. But still, if this is so, our heroine, with every second of silence, became more and more inclined to this theory. The girl decided to do something, so she asked Killian directly if he was also afraid to remove the curse from children. The guy's face instantly changed, and he hit the table, asking who else dared to say such stupidity. What do you mean, too? Selena only realized at that moment what she had said, so she began to justify herself, saying that she had only said it on the assumption that such people really existed. Killian sighed and returned to her question about books, because Selena had made a good point. It would be very good to teach them to read. After all, they were the children of a ducal family. That's why, if she needed anything, he said that she should feel free to contact Hans, because he does everything here. Selena smiled and thanked her husband. Soon the girl started to rise from her chair, but Killian's sudden question stopped her. He asked why she looked like she knew how to break the curse. Our heroine thought about it. Even if the curse was not mentioned in the novel, she still knows that this story has a happy ending. The girl stood up, looked thoughtfully into the distance, and said that she had no idea how to do this. At this point, Killian also began to rise, asking his wife if she didn't know the answer, even though she had such abilities. He didn't know how long he would have to pretend not to notice. He had heard about the Gilrod woman kissing her foot out of nowhere. And yet, despite all these moments, Selena still tells him that she knows nothing. He didn't know how he should understand this. Selena asked in confusion if that wasn't a sign of deep respect. Killian sighed and said he never thought she would treat him like a complete idiot. The girl clutched her dress and said that she had only recently learned about the Gilrod people and the children's curse, and if she hadn't accidentally encountered the children, she wouldn't have known about their existence. Of course, she wouldn't have known about her powers then. So the girl screamed, saying that it was Killian and his people who wanted her to know nothing in the first place. At this point, Selena was seriously angry. She assumed that it was all about the order of succession. Killian showed his composure, and the girl said that divine servants are used to attaching too much importance to even insignificant trifles. At that point, the guy told her that there were only 2 reasons why the Gilrods could have done that. Of course, the girl asked what those reasons were. One of the reasons is when they want to receive a blessing from a great divine chosen one, to whom the goddess has entrusted a prophecy. And the other reason was sincere condolences to the person they were going to bring as an offering to the goddess. A moment later, our heroine ran out of the Duke's room with a gloomy face. Gabrielle was surprised by such abruptness of the madame, so she tried to ask what happened, but the girl did not respond. Soon, Hans also joined in asking questions about what had happened, but she didn't answer him either. The butler entered the office and, turning to his lordship, asked why he had been so unrestrained with the Duchess. Killian, perplexed, asked him why he was so intemperate. Hans replied that his words about people and sacrifices were just a rumor, aimed at slandering them. Hans pointed out that he himself had seen how the Duchess sincerely wanted to help the young gentleman. Moreover, when he decided to agree to the marriage, Hans clearly remembers that he said that he would take care of his wife, so that she would not regret this marriage. In that case, he wondered why he had decided to hurt her. The guy asked in bewilderment, had he really treated her so badly before that she regretted the marriage? Hans turned to his lordship again. He pointed out that Selina's life now was strikingly different in modesty, especially from the life she had known as the daughter of a Grand Duke. Even all of Killian's hidden wealth would not be enough to even compare to her former lifestyle. Hans sighed and told the Duke that he should admit that he simply did not know how to treat his wife. In that case, Killian wanted an answer to his question. Wasn't it worth expecting what was happening now? He recalled that he had never been interested in this marriage, but he still dug up all the information about her, thinking that there might be someone behind her. But in any case, what was more important to him now was lifting the curse from the children that his brother had entrusted him to look after. Hans said that if that was the case, then he needed to figure out how to get along with his wife as soon as possible before it was too late. One way or another, the fact was that he still needed Selina, at least to achieve what he wanted. He may not have been interested in the marriage, but as long as he had the same goal, he should find a way to work together. The guy sighed heavily and turned away. It was obvious that he was thinking about something, but decided to keep it to himself. However, he also turned to Hans and said that Selina had a request for him. The butler asked in surprise what the request was. The Duke told him to find a tutor who would teach Irene and Erhi to read and write. Hans asked if there was any specific option. The answer came immediately. We need someone suitable, who won't be afraid of monsters if necessary. The action moves to our heroine's room, who was lying under the blanket and crying. Lily was confused, so she asked a logical question. What happened? Of course, the girl said that everything was fine, but she herself was in shock and absorbed in thoughts of sacrifice and condolences. A goddess who tries to make amends for her actions using someone else's body. A servant who hopes that I can lift a curse. Moreover, there is also a husband who suspects her and says such terrible things. It was a real combo that makes you want to go back home. However, at that moment, someone knocked on the door. Lily was the only one who answered, so she asked who had come to see them. It turned out that it was Gabrielle. Our heroine responded with a trembling voice and said to go inside. The initially calm girl went inside and immediately turned to the madam. She wanted to ask something, but as soon as she saw all this terrible situation, she asked if she could come over. The girl from under the blanket answered positively. In that case, the knight headed towards the bed, and Lily just moved a chair for her. Soon the maid left, and Gabriel sat down opposite Madame, and said that, although she did not know what his lordship had told her, she was sure that he had meant something else. Our heroine, perplexed, asked her bodyguard if she too knew about that kiss. Gabriel replied that the Gilrods were a people who were known for not picking even a dying leaf from a tree without any reason. They believed that everything on this earth was created by the great goddess Havina. Selina crawled out from under the blanket and said that she was sure in any case that there was some hidden meaning in it. Otherwise, she would not have kissed her leg without a good reason. Gabriel continued to look calmly at Madame and say that she did not think that Nanny Roina considered her an offering to the goddess. Moreover, she said that she assured the lady of this. Selina sighed heavily and said that if she was trying to protect Killian in this way, then it was not worth it. Gabriel said she says this from the heart, as her bodyguard, and it has nothing to do with him. In any case, although she doesn't know what was discussed in the office, it seems he made a mistake. Our heroine asked if she was serious. Gabriel said that she was proud to be his loyal knight. But yes, she was serious. Selina soon thanked her bodyguard, because if she hadn't talked to her, she would have continued to lie there in thought. She would have thought that she might become a living offering, or that she might be used as a puppet, so she thanked Gabriel again. At this point, the girl still couldn't hide her smile. The knight said that Madame's words were very valuable to her. Now the atmosphere in the room was more friendly and positive than before. The action moves to the next day. Our heroine looked like a mole. Lily was in shock. She understood that the swelling would not go away. She cried and said that she couldn't show herself to his lordship like that. Selina said that she had no intention of seeing him, even if he came to visit her. In that case, the maid assumed that they had had a big fight yesterday. Otherwise, she wouldn't have cried so much. But anyway, they say that nothing is as fleeting as a quarrel between two lovers. She was sure that everything would be fine soon, but Selina was not so sure. The girl was about to go out to get some ice, when suddenly, opening the door, she met Hans. The butler asked Lily if she could ask the Duchess to let him in to see her. However, even without hearing the maid's answer, Selina's voice came from inside, giving permission to enter. When he entered the room, he found Madame not in the best shape, so he asked what was wrong. Selina told him not to worry, and then asked what brought him there. Hans smiled and said that she had asked him to find a private tutor, and he thought he had found a suitable candidate. He didn't know for sure, of course, but he assumed that she might have heard the name. Pavel Yotrika. He is considered a young great sage. Our heroine began to try to remember this name, and the butler continued to say that no one had spoken about it for several decades, that he was not surprised that she did not know about it. Pavel is a legendary scholar who became a senior researcher at the Imperial Mage Tower at the age of 9. Our heroine was shocked when she heard the numbers. It's almost the same age as Irene and Erhi now. Hans said that this guy was also known for personally training the already adult crown prince by order of the emperor. As a result, he was granted the title of count, along with the territory of Hoxton Castle, which is known to have very fertile lands. Selina was, to put it mildly, surprised by such characteristics, so she asked if it was too much for them. Hans smiled and said that all his achievements up to that point were already in the past. He was no longer considered a member of the big stage, and that was because Pavel was thrown out of the Tower of Magicians 10 years ago for embezzlement of funds. In that case, our heroine was scared for another reason. That is, the butler wants the children to be taught by such a person. He may be a genius, but he has the mark of an unreliable person. Hans, in turn, reminded that Pavel will not teach ethics and morality, but history, mathematics, geography, and astronomy. He recommends him because the monastery to which he was exiled is not far from their duchy, and his term of imprisonment will soon come to an end. And also, importantly, he is blind. Selina immediately realized that if Pavel couldn't see, then he wouldn't be able to find out the secret, which meant she wouldn't have to worry about the children being portrayed as monsters. But that was all right. There was another question now. The girl looked at Hans and asked if Killian had given permission for this. The man smiled and said that his lordship had told him that the choice of the teacher and the teaching methods was entrusted to her, so she had full authority in this matter. In that case, he was interested in what Madame Selina's decision would be. The girl understood that there was no point in even thinking about it, because Pavel was the ideal option for them. Getting out of bed, she didn't even know how she could refuse after everything she had heard. That is why she wanted to meet him personally, to ask him to become a teacher for the children. The action moves to the annex. A sad Irene turns to Selina and asks if they can go with her. Our heroine smiled and asked to tell her how many days she would be gone. The girl sighed and said that she would be gone for 10 days. That's why Selina asked them to be obedient, to listen to Rowena in everything and not to leave the annex. And when they decide to fly, first make sure that they don't fly too high. The boys asked her why she was leaving here for such a long time, to which the girl replied that she had to bring a teacher for them. Irene and Erhi looked at each other. They were very surprised. Our heroine only said that this man would teach them to read, and also tell them about the stars and the night sky. And for this she needs to meet him in person, but he lives far away from here. However, the girl promised that she would return to them in 10 nights with their new teacher. The children hugged Selena and said that they would behave well and wait for her. But in any case, they asked her to try to return exactly 10 nights later. Our heroine hugged them back and said that she remembered the pinky promises, which meant she would be back on time. After some time, the girl came out into the street and approached the carriage. Gabriel was next to her. Coming closer, they noticed an incomprehensible crowd of people near the carriage. What happened? At this moment, Lily approached the Duchess and asked Madame why she was taking so long. She pointed to Killian and said that his lordship had been waiting for her outside for a long time. Apparently, he wanted to say something. The girl approached her husband and apologized for being late. She explained that the children did not want to let her go. In any case, she wanted to get to the point quickly, so she asked what was going on. Hans looked upset. Killian sighed heavily and said that most likely these old people had nothing better to do, so they decided to come here and look at the snow. Our heroine did not understand what they were talking about, when suddenly, Hans, as if hearing her thoughts, said that the elder Seyfried wanted to visit their estate as soon as possible, so they were discussing what to do. The man said that they had already sent them a response rejecting their request, but they were still receiving a lot of messages and were now worried. Selena asked if she understood correctly that they were talking about Madame Pontin, the wife of Uncle Adler, who is the head of the Council of Elders. She understands why she is so adamant about this issue, because she is the only one who knows about the children. Selena did not know whether Madame Pontin wanted to look at her, or perhaps she wanted to visit the children, but most likely both. The Duke looked at his wife in surprise and asked where she had learned this information. Our heroine responded by saying that she, in fact, was also the mistress of this house. Anyway, looking at Killian, she asked, would everything go wrong if she was not in the house when the elders came? Hans told her that this was not the first time this had happened, so she shouldn't worry. But Killian added that it would be very useful for her to take her time and explore their territory before returning. Selena did not understand why he said this with such impudence. And again, the butler intervened, saying that his lordship had meant something else. He wanted to tell her that she should enjoy her trip without worrying about anything. Our heroine sighed heavily, because she didn't understand what the problem was in telling her all this directly. Anyway, she said that she would be on her way, so she started to climb into the carriage. Hans and Anna began to see Madame Selena off, wishing her a safe journey, and also that they would wait for her return. Our heroine was very happy that she had a place where they would wait for her. But one person, of course, was too emotional, which even scared Selena. Killian stood there with a stone face, as if nothing was happening. In any case, the girl asked what happened. Did he forget to say something else? The guy extended his hand and asked Selena to do the same in return. Selena, although she didn't understand what was happening, still decided to give him her hand. At that moment, Killian took his beloved's hand and, pulling it towards him, kissed it. He also said that when the men of their family kiss their wife's hand, it is considered a sign of respect. After these words, he raised his gaze and added to what had already been said that this was also his apology. Soon he let go of the blushing Selena's hand and asked her to remember this. After some time, the carriage was on its way, and our heroine was still thinking about what had happened just an hour ago. She assumed that these were just formal apologies, because now, from the curse to the situation in the family, everything had changed so much. Although, even if this is true, then perhaps in the future, Killian's heart will still be directed towards something else. For example, towards Selena, and not towards her younger brother Sion. She began shaking her head sharply, not understanding what she was even thinking about. This definitely couldn't be happening. Now she had to focus on what was in front of her. After some time, they finally arrived. Lily looked out the window and asked Madame if they had arrived at the right place, since their journey had only taken 3 days, and this place looked more like a cemetery than a monastery. Gabriel helped the Duchess out and also answered the maid's question. A criminal who went against the emperor would definitely not be placed in a rich monastery. Almost with tears in her eyes, the girl asked the madam and the knight to quickly find this young sage and run away from here. Then the maid asked if they even knew what Pavel looked like, to which the girl replied that she only knew that he was blind and that he was a little older than Killian. As for the words about him being blind, Lily thought for a moment and then pointed at the guy in front of them, saying that it might be him. She explained her assumption by the fact that he has a stick, and moreover, the dog looks like a guide dog. Our heroine, of course, did not know if it was really him, but she still named him. The guy turned around in surprise and, taking off his hood, asked who had said his name. Our heroine knew that he must be about 25 or 26 years old, but she would definitely believe him if he said that he was younger than her. Pavel was so handsome that it seemed that if you just looked at him once, you would remember him for the rest of your life. At that moment, Lily, in surprise and excitement, said something amazing that surprised even Selena. The girl, perplexed, said that she had never seen such a handsome man before. These words surprised the guy, which is why he asked again. Our heroine pinched Lily to stop her from talking too much, because that's not why they were here. Selena introduced herself and said that she was the wife of Duke Killian Seyfried, the current head of the house. The girl explained that she came here to discuss something with him in person. Pavel bowed and said that he was surprised that the Duchess had decided to come to see him in person. He asked if he could find out the reason. He immediately decided to say that no matter how ashamed he was a criminal, and he was not used to anyone looking for him. Looking around, our heroine noticed the interest of the society around her, so she said that this conversation was not for strangers' ears. She asked to go to the carriage. Of course, Pavel didn't mind, so in just a few moments they were sitting inside the carriage. The girl asked right away if he could teach the children. They were ready to offer him housing, food, any other things he needed for comfort, and would also take care of the payment. The surprising thing was that Pavel immediately agreed, without even asking any unnecessary questions. The girl was so happy that she couldn't even tell if she was really awake. However, at that moment, the guy said he had one more condition. He said he wanted them to give him a pass to pass through the northern gate of the ducal castle. And also, when he wanted to pass through them, he asked to provide him with a horse and an escort. Selena was surprised, because the duke's castle was surrounded only by snowy plains, so the question was, why would he go anywhere? The guy said there was one key there that he really wanted to find. So does Selena agree? The action takes us to the children, who were already missing Selena and did not know what to do. Erhi suddenly suggested that they go and look at her, because if they fly high enough, people will think that they are birds. Irene smiled and said that it would be best to just wait, since she would be back soon. Erhi sighed as heavily as he could, saying that 3 whole nights had already passed. Irene decided to show wisdom and corrected her brother by saying that only 3 nights had passed. In that case, the boy said that he would at least go and look around the area. After some time, Erhi was walking along the path, wondering if he was going in the right direction. Suddenly, he was distracted by the pain in his wings, which was sharp and piercing. The action takes us back a bit. Selena asked Erhi if his wings hurt. She assumed that they were just growing, since he was at the age when children start to grow rapidly. It was precisely because of the rapid growth that problems could have started. But in any case, the girl told him that in the future, he would become amazing. Looking at Erhi's wings, our heroine even said that she would like to be able to fly like him. The guy at that very moment flapped upwards, thinking that Selena would definitely be happy if he learned to fly much higher. He couldn't wait to show her how much higher and longer he had learned to fly. Erhi turned sharply and flew wherever his eyes looked, his huge shadow flying over the trees. At that moment, the boy stopped abruptly. He saw a train of carriages in front of him. Looking closer, he saw a flag with a wolf on it, and if he remembered correctly, there was a wolf on Selena's carriage too. Could she have returned earlier? He immediately imagined that she would be happy if she saw that Erhi had decided to meet her. In any case, he decided that he should check if it was really her. Looking around a little, he realized that he didn't see her, which meant it was time to go back. He sighed heavily and headed back. But suddenly, he heard a conversation in the carriage. Someone was talking about Killian deciding to deceive someone. The boy froze as he looked at the carriage. He wondered what they were talking about Killian. The people inside were talking about how this time they had to take care of the monsters themselves. The guys inside were gossiping about everything. At that moment, the conversation turned to Selena. They knew for sure that they had to finish their plan before that stupid lady noticed. By the way, they noticed a huge dark shadow in the carriage, which is why they looked out the window. Behind the trees, they discovered a huge dragon. People immediately started shouting, saying that there was a monster in front of them. Erhi was very scared by such abruptness. The knights began to gather. They were going to use the purification stone, and also, the archers were ordered to prepare to shoot. Erhi was incredibly scared at this moment. He couldn't fully understand what he had done, but tears involuntarily began to roll down his cheeks. He didn't understand how he managed to get into such a situation, but as if by a miracle, he saw a palace behind him. The guy realized that everything would be fine. The main thing for him now was to return to the estate as soon as possible. But right at that moment, one of the men shouted and ordered the archers to attack. One of the arrows hit Erhi right in the wing, causing him to fall down. The last thing he thought was that Irene would worry. Meanwhile, the action smoothly moves to the Duke, to whose office Hans entered, saying that he should already finish with the documents. Suddenly, Killian heard a loud noise behind him. Looking out the window, he assumed it was a bird. However, after looking a little more closely, he realized what he was seeing in front of him. The Duke instantly jumped up from his seat, realizing that something very bad had happened. He ran to the surrounding area as fast as he could. The man looked around, realizing that they had to be here somewhere. Then he wondered. It was Irene and Erhi. Where was the other one at that time anyway? He still couldn't find it, when suddenly, as if by magic, it fell from the sky. Killian instinctively grabbed his sword, but immediately he thought he was going crazy. Was he going to raise his sword against his nephews again? Nevertheless, the dragon threw all its weight at Killian, who grabbed it. It resisted, of course, but did not bite or use its claws. In that case, it only means that he is not even trying to harm him. At that moment, Killian seemed to sense that Erhi was standing in front of him, asking him for help. Shortly after the panic tremors, the dragon lost consciousness. It seemed to have become smaller because it had used up all its magic power. Killian had also used up a lot of energy. Then the Duke noticed the reason for the dragon's panic, namely, the arrow. He could not understand who dared to do this, when suddenly he noticed the coat of arms. At that moment, worried Shivar's knights came running to Killian, asking if everything was okay. The Duke said that everything was fine, but at the same time, someone shot an arrow at Erhi. The guy urgently ordered to send a letter to Selena, asking her to return home as quickly as possible. By the way, Killian assumed that their guests should have already arrived at their destination. The action moves to the estate. At this time, Countess Pontian Siegfried has just arrived, getting out of her carriage. Killian met her and immediately welcomed her to his home. Pontaine said she was glad to see him, and then surprised. She noticed his appearance and assumed he was hunting monsters. Realizing that the Countess was talking about his chin, which had blood on it, the boy said that he had simply tripped. 2 more people followed the Countess, Count Adler and also Marquise Raymond, who began to greet the head of the house emotionally. Adler suddenly apologized for coming uninvited, but the current situation still required their intervention. However, the Marquis also noticed Killian's chin. He assumed that he simply failed to catch the monster. Incidentally, he said that his squad had shot one down here during their journey. Killian tensed a little with rage when he learned that the arrow had come from the Marquis after all. At this point, Countess Pontin decided to draw attention to herself by asking how long the 3 gentlemen planned to keep her waiting outside like this. The Duke apologized and suggested they go inside. He should have been more attentive to such details. It was chilly now. Anyway, everything was already prepared for them. As soon as they entered the estate, a butler approached Killian, calling for the Duke. He came to convey the message from the annex that Sir Winter had sent. He said that Lord Erhi was too excited when he woke up, so the Black Wolves erected a barrier just in case. The guy asked how Erhi was doing now, to which Hans replied that he had a pretty serious wound, which required urgent treatment, but he still hadn't returned to his normal form. Killian was excited and very angry. He understood that he could not do anything now. Hans, nevertheless, encouraged the Duke, saying that as soon as Madame returned, she would be able to clear the monstrous energy, and the doctors would immediately begin treatment. The guy asked if they could only wait for her, to which the butler replied that he had already sent an urgent message, so he was sure that she would return soon. Of course, all that was left was to wait. But the action smoothly shifts to our heroine, who managed to hear the news about the appearance of the monster. Lily said that according to the villagers, not long ago a monster attacked nobles passing through the mountain range. Selina was worried, because it was not that far from the outbuilding. However, Gabriel asked Madame to calm down, because as long as the Shivar's knights exist, no monster will cross the northern rampart. Lily also added that the nobleman's knights were able to kill the monster by shooting from a crossbow. The knight was suddenly surprised. Selina asked what was wrong. The girl explained that no one usually used crossbows, since there were no ferocious animals near the hunting grounds of the duchy that could require their use. The only ones who have this weapon as a permanent weapon are the crossbow squad of Marquis Raymond Siegfried. Our heroine immediately assumed that this was about one of the elders. Gabrielle nodded her head, making it clear that this was the case. In that case, the girl realized that the elders had already arrived. But still, the monster and the crossbows? Selina had a bad feeling, but she hoped that the children were okay. However, at that very moment, our heroes saw a carrier pigeon flying above them. The knight immediately noticed that the letter had his lordship's seal on it, so she paid attention to it. Selina, without thinking twice, grabbed the letter and began to read it, because she was curious about what required such importance, but at that moment she froze. It seemed like an eternity had passed before she could finally say something. Gabriel and the maid called Madame. Our heroine was still in the same horror, but finally managed to utter a few words, making it clear that they were talking about Erhi. The knight looked at the letter in horror, which said that Erhi was injured, so it was necessary to return home as soon as possible. To say that they immediately set off on their journey is simply to say nothing. But at that moment, our heroine could not come to her senses, which is why Gabriel seemed to wake her up. By the way, how did they end up in this forest? On the way back, they were lucky enough to meet Hakeen, which significantly sped up the way back. However, the boy sighed and apologized for the fact that they would have to walk through the poison-soaked lands. Selina smiled at him and said that everything was fine. Fortunately, she didn't feel the effects of the poisonous air, although it was most likely due to divine power. The knights were truly delighted with Madame, for she could walk even through such places. At that moment, the girl asked in surprise if the poison should not spread to that place. Håkon said that it was true, but they erected a barrier to protect themselves. The girl nodded and said that she understood everything. In any case, she suggested to continue, because they had very little time left. She only hoped that everything was okay with Erhi. As she got closer, Selina thought that the boy was very scared when the arrow hit him. She should visit him as soon as possible. Soon the girl noticed a huge barrier in front of her, created by the purification stones. Everything was fine, of course, but something else surprising happened. Selina noticed that Irene was also inside the barrier. Apparently, she too was furious with her brother. Most likely it was because of the injury, but this time, he seemed to be suffering much less than last time. At this point, the knights approached the Duchess, saying that they would wait for her here. Lord Erhi was in a very bad way, so they decided to take him outside. They didn't want him to get hurt anymore, but they leave the rest to her anyway. The girl was surprised that the knights believed in her so much, but, looking at her trembling hand, the girl was not so confident in her abilities. But there was no other way. She had to help them. Soon the girl began to walk forward and ask the knights to stay behind, because it could be dangerous. Sighing, the Duchess turned to Havina. As soon as the sphere appeared, our heroine said that she would only say this once, so it was necessary to listen carefully. She wanted to make a pact with her. And by the way, they say that gods who make a pact with people put their existence on the line. In general, if we speak in other words, it will be an unbreakable pact. The girl summed up her words by saying that she would allow Havina to use her body as she wanted. However, she said that this will not happen until she dies. In any case, someone more suitable for this role may soon appear, the goddess asked in surprise. Someone more suitable than her? Selina nodded. Maybe someone who doesn't have magical powers, but loves this family much more than her. That is why, if such a person appears, then this burden will fall on him. But now she needs the strength and freedom of the goddess Havina. Smiling, Selina added that, provided that such a person does not appear, she will continue to bear this burden. The goddess agreed, but slightly corrected her words, saying that the final choice of the worthy one would remain hers. A moment later, the girl turned to Sir Winter and asked him to remove the barrier. The man wanted to say something, but our heroine got ahead of him and asked him to trust her and to do it as quickly as possible. Remfry has known the Duchess for a while, so he decided to trust her, so he asked the other knights to remove the barrier. At this moment, our heroine approached the barrier, which gradually disappeared. The girl turned to Erhi and Irene and threw some strange dust at them, saying that it would free them from the curse. The action moves to the estate. Marquis Raymond hit the table and said that he would get straight to the point. He received word that the monsters he thought were dead were still alive. He doesn't know what they did, but it turns out that they're actually walking around the entire territory in the guise of people. The Marquis asked if he understood correctly that they wanted to convey to him that the seeds of disaster that the Duke had destroyed 7 years ago had returned to life. Adler interrupted his monologue and said that he understood the reason for his disappointment. He asked him to remember how they chose the Duke as the head of this family after he became an adult. As far as he could remember, this was only possible because he had promised to personally destroy the seeds of disaster. At this point, the Countess intervened, saying that she had a question. Killian no longer understood who he should listen to, who he should answer, but he still told the Countess to ask her question. Ponton asked if the Duchess of this house knew about the curse, and the fact that everyone in this house kept it a secret. Adler said that for a woman who had only recently joined the family, the story might be too much. Pontin finished his words by saying that she herself knew it was cruel. But anyway, this is a story about someone's own child being born a monster, and maybe even being killed by his own father. Killian said he wouldn't allow it, and the Countess asked if he really thought the problem would resolve itself. That is, until they had children? Adler added that they could not risk becoming enemies of the Grand Duke of Kiev and his family in any case. Pontin asked the Duke if he could keep this secret forever. Killian was incredibly angry. At one point, he almost lost it, but he stopped himself in time. He understood that Selena had known about the curse for a long time, but there was no point in telling about it now. The guy sighed and said that she didn't need to know, so they could close the topic. Pontin was furious. How could it be that the Duchess had already become the lady of the house, but did not know the secret? If the anger she felt upon learning this secret later was directed at their family, Marquis Raymond smiled and asked the Countess not to complicate things too much. If necessary, he was ready to deal with these monsters personally. In that case, they won't have any problems with the Grand Duke, and the Duke's position won't be in jeopardy either. At these vile words, Killian could barely contain his anger. However, the Marquis liked this idea very much, which is why he was going to take his crossbowmen and go into battle. Every vile word that came from the Marquis made Killian more and more angry. He even considered simply killing them. Just at that very moment, before anything terrible happened, a joyful Hans ran into the room, looking for his lordship. Killian asked what had happened. What was the reason for him to burst into their office? To which the butler replied that the Duchess had returned. The guy immediately ran to meet the girl. As soon as they saw each other, our heroine said that she was glad to see him. The Duke wanted to ask something, but the girl pointed to the knights behind her and said that the children were very tired and had fallen asleep. Selena asked them to take the children to her room and call a doctor there. The butler nodded and turned around. However, before leaving, Killian stopped the Duchess and asked how she did it. The girl smiled sheepishly and said that she would explain everything later. The elders who came down were surprised. Pontaine assumed that the children who had just been taken up were Claudia's children, and the Marquise, in turn, was surprised by the words about children, saying that they were not children at all. He also said that he had now seen with his own eyes that the rumors about the Duchess being the most beautiful girl in the empire were not exaggerated. The man came closer and bowed, introducing himself to Selena. He added that he was very pleased to meet her. Our heroine immediately realized that it was most likely he who wounded Erhi. She showed her indifference by simply walking past Raymond, saying that if she meant the previous Duchess, then he was right. She then said that the children were probably very excited to go outside for the first time in a long time, and overdid it a bit. Adler asked how often she spent time with them. Selena laughed and said that they seemed to really like her, and that she also enjoyed their company, because she had been a little lonely before. Adler was very happy to hear this. Moreover, she was sure that the children of the previous duke were incredibly charming. She would like to get to know them properly. After some time, the girl finally finished talking with the elders, so she immediately ran to her room. Only when she entered did she ask if the doctor hadn't arrived yet, since Erhi was wounded. Anna responded to this by saying that she did not think that this was necessary. Our heroine was very surprised by these words, so she asked again. The maid explained that there was no trace of the boy's wound. She was afraid that it might turn out for the worse, but everything seems to be fine, so she feels relieved. The woman began to cry and thank St. Kanu. Our heroine asked why such gratitude. At that moment, Killian came up from behind and said that it was probably because he was born with magical abilities. Anna immediately turned around, assuming she should leave. A few seconds later, she left the room. Then, our heroine asked Killian if he really meant that the boy was cured by his powers. The Duke replied that he clearly felt it when the monstrous energy died down. Selena was surprised. Can those who have magical powers detect magic in other people? Killian said that they can simply tell whether a person has this power or not. Although, at this moment, the Duke was no less surprised. He asked if she was not very knowledgeable about magical powers because of her special abilities. Our heroine realized that she was almost caught, so she tensed up a bit and nodded her head. You could say that. Killian turned to the girl a few seconds later and asked her not to misunderstand him. He wasn't trying to belittle her by doing this. It turned out that the previous Duchess had enormous magical power, which is why she believed that she could handle the children, even if they were born monsters. However, in the end, what happened happened. Killian involuntarily clenched his hand into a fist. Our heroine tried to calm her husband down by saying that they now knew that Erhi was able to heal himself with his magical powers, just like other people like him. Looking at the children, she assumed that this would only mean that the situation was changing for the better. Little by little, Killian suddenly laughed darkly and said that he didn't know if Selena would believe it or not, but many said that it was the goddess who put this curse on them. Selena looked at him thoughtfully and asked if he really meant that he didn't believe the curse could be lifted. The Duke nodded his head. Our heroine suddenly thought that the goddess who cast this curse had waited hundreds of years in the hopes of helping lift the curse, so Killian could relax on this account. The girl assured her husband that everything would be fine with the children. She was sure that there was no need to worry. Killian, at this point, decided to correct his wife's words a little, asking if he understood correctly that she meant that everything would be fine with the children as long as she was near them. To the Duke's surprise, our heroine said that this was not so. The children would be fine without her. Yes, of course. Now they will be good with her, and then with Scion Kiev, and with all those who will be ready to sacrifice their lives for him. The girl also said that she plans to build a room for the children in the main building. It would still be bad if rumors started that they were keeping them locked up in the annex. At this time, Killian's face behaved strangely. The guy, despite the good news, for some reason became sad. However, he decided not to show it, so he turned around abruptly and told Selena that she could do whatever she wanted. Selena was surprised that he was already leaving, so she suggested that he stay until the children woke up. After a short silence, the Duke finally said that he didn't think it was a good idea. Before leaving, he added that he had once almost killed them with his own hands. Our heroine was shocked by the words she heard, and moreover, one can say that at first she did not believe them. Killian decided to explain himself right away. At the time, he believed that he could remove the curse from them with his own powers, but only found out that he was a fool. The whole situation happened right after they were born, and he hoped that they would forget about it. However, whenever Killian tried to touch the children, something happened that made him cry. Erhi and Irene were afraid of him on an instinctive level, and immediately began to feel terrified. Looking at his hand, the Duke assumed that the children remembered his magical power, which threatened their lives. Soon the room was silent. Selena didn't know what to say. She was in a bit of shock herself, but she certainly wanted to sympathize. Killian suddenly started talking further. The guy said that the children's room should be close to her room, and even if necessary, he could move to the farthest room. After these words, the Duke left the room, leaving our heroine with her thoughts. She was very sad. because all he wanted was to save the children. She then turned her gaze to the children, realizing that they most likely wouldn't wake up anytime soon. She also understood that Killian himself told her that the children were regaining their magical abilities, so she should just wait and monitor the situation. But the most important thing was something else. The girl turned to Anna and asked how long the elders would stay here. The maid replied that she didn't know, but she had heard something. As far as she knew, the elders insisted on holding a reception in honor of their arrival. Selena screamed, perplexed by this request of the elder. In any case, she would like to talk to the countess, but she had no desire to deal with her husband or the marquise. Our heroine couldn't understand why Killian let them stay. Normally, he would have given them the cold shoulder. The Duchess, of course, asked this question. She was curious as to why Killian was so lenient with the elders. Anna thought for a moment, and then said that during the time of the first Duke, Verkan Seyfried, even the snowy plains were part of their duchy. Our heroine assumed that this was about the time when these plains were not yet covered with snow because of the curse. Anna said that at that time the lands were fertile. The girl thought, since all these lands had turned into snow-covered fields, food and other resources were most likely in short supply. At the same time, the monsters continued to arrive. There was a shortage of magic stones and soldiers, and there was no other choice but to turn to the elders for help. The ducal family had their own savings, but they were clearly not enough. Selena sighed heavily, not understanding why they were causing so much trouble. Anna asked in surprise what Madame had just said. The girl smiled and replied that she was just talking to herself. In any case, the maid decided to express her opinion regarding the fact that she was sure that his lordship was upset by this fact more than anyone else. At that moment, Selena even regretted a little that she was not so well informed about the politics and social structure of this world. After all, she was the daughter of the Grand Duke of Kiev, but she hadn't even had the chance to teach this marquise a lesson. She wondered, should she approach him? But, looking back, she decided that she would think about it later. Right now, the most important thing for her was that the children woke up. After some time, our heroine was running down the corridor, perplexed that Gabriel had not called her immediately after the children woke up. Selena soon realized that she hadn't even left them any magic stones, so she shouldn't have left them alone. Already in front of the door, she thought that perhaps it would be better to give them normal food instead of magic stones. Soon the girl rushed inside, calling for the children. She was very worried that everything would be okay with them. At that very moment, she noticed Erhi and Irene inside the room, with something strange on their faces. Our heroine was in incredible horror and shock. She did not understand why there was blood on their faces, because she was told that they had cured themselves with magic. Selena assumed that it was because of divine power, but suddenly, Anna's voice was heard from behind, asking the Duchess not to worry so much. The woman explained her words by saying that the children simply ate some strawberries. Selena, seriously shocked, slowly turned around and asked again. Then she turned back to the children, who were surprised by the name of this strange thing. Ari said that the name was certainly strange, but they were very tasty. Irene smiled and said that she also really liked them. They were delicious and looked cute, so she handed over the strawberries and asked Selena to try them. Our heroine smiled and said that she would be happy to eat them with them next time. It was a huge relief for her, because the children no longer needed to feed on magical stones, and the divine power in her said that everything would be fine now. Either way, she knew she should thank Havina, but she was probably sleeping right now. Then the girl smiled again. She really should have taught the children how to use cutlery, because if they were going to live together, then… At that moment, the children asked a question that surprised everyone in the room. Irene asked if people were afraid of them anymore. The Duchess smiled, realizing that she had completely forgotten to tell them. The girl said that no one would be afraid of them anymore. Irene was incredibly happy with these words. Did this mean that now they would not have to hide? Selena asked if Anna looked scared. The children immediately thought about it, realizing that the maid had come to them with goodness and delicious strawberries. The children immediately shook their heads, saying that she was not scared, but quite the opposite. At this point, Ari asked if they could now visit Selena themselves to play with her. The girl began to shake her head, making it clear that this was not exactly a good idea. The boy was upset, but at that very moment, Selena said something surprising to them. Leaning over, she said that they would no longer need to go to her place, because they would live here. The girl explained that they could do whatever they wanted, but if they wanted to continue living in the annex, she could continue to visit them every day. They instantly ran into Selena's arms, saying in one voice that they wanted to be near her. Our heroine almost cried at that moment, because the joy she felt was very pleasant to feel. They soon began to discuss finding a nanny for the children later, but until then, our heroine would like Anna to help her with this. But she asked for forgiveness, because she already knows that she has a lot to do as the head maid, to which the woman replied that everything is not so, and she is all for it. At this time, Irene was walking and yawning, but soon approached her brother to discuss something. The girl asked if he really thought everything would be okay if they stayed here. He was surprised and asked what could be wrong. Irene explained her words by the fact that Killian lives here too, if he had managed to forget. The guy still didn't understand what his sister was getting at, so he said that everything should be fine. Only Irene said something that confused him. It turns out, from the girl's words, it was Killian who wounded him. The boy turned away and told his sister that everything was not at all as she thought. He screamed, saying that Killian had not harmed him. The girl suddenly covered her brother's mouth with her hands. At this point, our heroine turned to the children and said that she needed to go somewhere with the maid, so she asked them to wait for her here. The children awkwardly said that they would wait for her. Selena promised to return soon, and soon left their room with the maid. After Irene exhaled, she turned to her brother and began to press him for more details. Could it be that Killian hadn't hurt him after all? The boy looked very guilty about this story. He explained that he had hit him first, because in fact, he had hurt him. However, from what he remembers, Killian called his name at that moment. He said it wasn't Killian's arrow. In that case, it's logical that Irene asked who was to blame for this incident. The boy immediately replied that the people who arrived here in the carriage were to blame. On the street, near the carriage, stood the Marquise, who was talking about his business with the knight. Irene asked if they were the ones he was talking about. He nodded his head and also said that it was this man who gave the order, and also called Selena stupid. This fact, a little, but made the boy angry. Irene decided to support her brother, saying that they should teach this stupid old man a lesson. At this time, Raymond was perplexed and asked since when they were forbidden to visit the abandoned annex. Hans tried to calm them down and said that such was the Lord's order. The Marquise began to shout and say that this was very arrogant, because the shield of the empire does not belong to him alone. This title applies to the whole family, but Adler, on the contrary, tried to stop the Marquise, saying that despite the fact that the building was empty, it was filled with monstrous evil energy, which meant it was not worth going there. But Raymond couldn't calm down. He wondered since when they decided that the annex was empty. He wondered if those children who appeared were real. Adler asked in bewilderment whether the Marquis really thought that the children brought by the Duchess could be fake, and the real ones hidden in the annex. Raymond shouted sharply, saying that these were not children at all, but little monsters that were being trained here and kept as secret weapons. Coming closer to the Count, the Marquis asked him to think about everything himself. Is it possible that all of them still haven't been able to find a way to lift the curse in these 100 years? At that moment, the cursed children appeared before them, and in human form. Could this really be possible? He understood that as soon as this stupid daughter of the prince did something, Suddenly, the Marquise began to cough, realizing that he was already saying too much, because there were other ears here. He said that in any case, there was something that he had heard from a reliable source. Adler still had some doubts, so he reminded them that these children looked exactly like the previous Duke and Duchess. Raymond laughed, telling the Count that he was a fool to think that finding similar children was so difficult. The Count said that his lordship must have a reason for forbidding going to the annex. The Marquise laughed at this point, saying that most likely the rumors about the Count's wife wearing trousers even around him were true, because he was an incredible coward. Adler, perplexed, asked the Marquise what he was allowing himself to do. Raymond replied that one cannot be afraid all the time. His knights are ready to protect them, and what monsters could survive a meeting with his crossbowmen? At this point, Hans intervened in their conversation, saying that he could not allow his troops to set foot on the territory of this place, as this would be considered treason. Raymond was shocked by this news, but he cleared his throat and said that he could handle it himself, without his knights. Adler wanted to say something, but the Marquis interrupted him and told him to return to his wife, and he, like a real man, would go there himself and check everything. Hans nodded his head and agreed, but before leaving, he asked the Marquis to watch his step, because the path passed through the western forest, and it was dark and dangerous there. Raymond became a little tense at this point, because it was really late, and the butler had also asked him to be careful. After a while, Hans stood alone in the middle of the forest, not believing that a man like the Marquis was an elder. Well, at least he was, as the Duke described him. Anyway, he sent his bird with a note straight to the Duke's office to tell him everything. Soon the man turned around, getting ready to go about his business, and at that very moment, Erhi and Irene appeared from the bushes. The action takes us to the Duke, who was just reading a letter from the butler. The guy said that, apparently, the Marquise is still coming here. Remfry laughed and said that he couldn't even imagine that one of the elders could be like that. How little faith there is in the current ducal house. Killian explained that he most likely needed something that he could use to his advantage, since he is one of those who put honor and wealth above all else. Remfry at this point said that Raymond, for all that, had not even considered the possibility of betrayal. He assumed that the Marquis was so cowardly that he would not dare to do such a thing. Killian nodded, saying that the loudest bark was usually from the most frightened dog. He was sure that the Marquis would come, look at the outbuilding and run away, and tell everyone that he had thoroughly examined everything. While Sir Winter was talking about something of his own, showing his displeasure, the Duke heard a noise and turned around, seeing familiar silhouettes behind the tree. Remfry noticed that his lordship was distracted by something, so he asked what was wrong, but Killian said that everything was fine. At this point, the boy told Zeke and the other wolves to wait for the Marquis at a suitable place. Remfry asked in surprise if the Duke would not go there. Killian told Sir Winter to go first and he would follow. Of course he noticed the children, but he didn't understand what they were doing there. Did they really want to go back to the annex? He thought they would be able to adjust to life in the manor as long as they lived with Cielina, but they felt too uncomfortable being around him. While thinking about these things, Killian came up with a solution, so he turned to Erhi. However, the boy did not even listen to the Duke, but said that this vile scumbag said nasty things about Cielina. Then the boy slowly lowered his head and said that he said the same thing about Killian, so they decided to come closer to him. Only after hearing the words about the vile bastard did Killian think about the Marquis, which most likely was what he was, because only he could say such a thing. The veins on the guy's face immediately tensed. He couldn't believe that this fool dared to insult his wife. The children were shaking at Killian, who was in front of them. Irene did not come out from behind the tree at all. The Duke cleared his throat and said that he had taken a slightly wrong tone, since he had meant something completely different. Holding out his hand, he told the children that this stupid pig needed to be taught a lesson. Once again, the action shifts to the Marquis, who was gradually making his way towards the extension and was finally beginning to see its outlines. He was shocked by what he had to do because of those damn monsters, and he heard that there was an underground prison somewhere around here, so it could probably be dangerous. All this time, Raymond looked like a paranoid person because he kept turning his head while he was being watched. Of course, it was the Shivar's knights. The knight turned to the captain and said that there were only 10 steps left to the pit. The guy assumed that even a rope would not have to be used. The knight nodded and said that it looked like it. In any case, they shouldn't be noticed here, so they should retreat. But Zeke wanted to leave after they saw him fall. Suddenly, the boy wondered if they had dug a hole too deep. Zeke decided that nothing would happen to the Marquis, except that he might get lost in prison. Just then, the Marquis began to scream incredibly loudly. There was a crash. The knights decided that he had fallen into their trap, but the amazing thing was that he simply fell to the ground in fear, without ever falling into their trap. It turned out that the cause of his incredibly loud scream was the Duke, along with the children. The knight suggested that it was time to change plans, but Zeke said that he didn't understand what was going on either. The boy assumed that the Duke was late because he wanted to bring the young lord and lady. Killian suddenly noticed Erhi, who was flying, which meant that he had already recovered. However, his thoughts were interrupted by the shrill screams of the Marquise, who was shocked by the monster's wings. The Marquis stuttered as he said that they both had wings, which only meant that all the rumors were true. Raymond fell on his knees and began to beg his lordship's forgiveness, saying that he had not suspected him of anything. He continued to beg for forgiveness, saying that he didn't even know that he was training these monsters for the good of the family. Killian didn't expect to see any other reaction, but he was still disappointed by the Marquise's pity. At that moment, Irene turned to him. The girl, with an incredibly sweet smile, asked if she could teach the Marquise a lesson. They both turned their heads towards Raymond. A smirk slowly appeared on Irene's face. Raymond, looking at the girl, expected to see the worst scenarios that could happen to him at that moment. Irene at this point started asking him if he was really the bad guy who shot the crossbow. The Marquise began to shout, saying that he did not even know them, and then turned to the Duke, continuing to beg him for forgiveness. He was, after all, Seyfried too. Killian just asked in surprise how he could help him. Looking at the Marquise, he asked if he understood correctly that one of the Seyfried was not capable of handling a little girl. Raymond turned his head back to the little girl, perplexed by these words. Because this is a real monster. He fell to the ground and began to crawl backwards, asking her not to come near him. Irene, meanwhile, got into the swing of things. She wanted to make fun of the impudent old man, so she took a step forward, frightening him. Raymond, of course, staggered back and soon found himself in the hole he had fallen into. The man began coughing and asking what that foul smell was. Erhi and Irene stood above him and just laughed at him, saying that he got what he deserved. The Shivar's knights also breathed a sigh of relief, because they had not dug this huge hole in vain. At this time, our heroine raised a panic in the duchy, because the children left at such a late hour, and no one knows where they went. The maids asked for forgiveness, because they did not dare to ask the children where they went. Hans came at this moment to ease the madame's worries. He said that they had most likely gone out for a short while to unwind, and would most likely return soon. But our heroine still wasn't going to sit idle, so she rejected this idea and said that she urgently needed to go to the extension. At this moment, Anna also came running and managed to stop the Duchess, saying that the young lord and lady had just returned. The woman was about to bow down to greet the young lord and lady, but suddenly she raised her head in surprise. In front of them, the people saw the Duke, with children near him. No one warned that his lordship had also returned. In any case, our heroine came closer and asked what happened. Then, our heroine turned her gaze to their feet and noticed that the children were completely dirty. However, Killian smiled and said that he met them on the way back. The children next to him finally looked happy. Irene told Selina that nothing had happened, and Erhi apologized for them returning so late. The girl assumed that they were definitely hiding something, and most importantly, that Killian was definitely involved in it. She exhaled heavily, knowing that they wouldn't tell her what had happened anyway, so she had to play. Our heroine smiled sweetly and asked the children to look at themselves, because they definitely needed to go to the bathroom. The kids agreed with this, so they were going to follow Shelina. But before they left, they waved to Killian and said that they would see each other later. The Duke was glad that the children could communicate with him and were not afraid of him, so he waved after them. Our heroine, of course, was no less glad that they were still able to get closer. And yet, on the way, she decided to try to ask the children what happened, but they unanimously said that it was a secret. After some time, our heroine asked her husband in surprise if the Marquis had really left. Killian replied that as far as he knew, he had left that night. Silenus was surprised that Raymond had slipped out of the house in the middle of the night. However, the girl couldn't help but notice that the Duke looked pleased. The boy smiled and said that the old man was too annoying. And, by the way, the fact that he left of his own free will warmed the heart no less. And most importantly, it was all thanks to Selina. The girl asked in surprise why this was so. Killian replied that if he had not been given the stone mine after their engagement, he would have had to persuade the Marquise to continue to allow them to mine from him as before. Selina asked in surprise how this related to their conversation. Killian decided to change the subject and asked his wife how her tea party with the Countess had gone. Our heroine sighed heavily, because she herself knew that she was quite a mysterious person, but she decided to tell how it all happened. So, the action moves to yesterday. Selina walked down the corridor, realizing that Countess Seyfried had just introduced the previous Duchess to their family. Suddenly, she thought about the question. Did she treat her like a daughter? After all, judging by her own words, she spoke well of Claudia, saying that her children must be charming. However, our heroine was also told that this was the first visit from the Countess since she had fallen out with the previous Duchess. She must have known about the curse. Perhaps the Countess tried to convince Claudia not to have children, because she was like a daughter to her, so it is not surprising that she valued her more than future children. And so, it would be nice if she saw her grandchildren in her current children. Looking at Erhi and Irene, our heroine thought that they definitely could use another person on their side. Besides, by that time she will most likely not be here for obvious reasons, so she will do everything in her power until then. After some time, Selina was sitting at tea with the Countess. She immediately noticed that her mood was much better than she expected. At this point, Pontin said that this tea had a pleasant aroma. Our heroine smiled and said that she had been told that she liked this tea. Unexpectedly, the Countess addressed the Duchess by the name Claudia, but immediately corrected herself, saying that the previous Duchess had recommended this tea to her and she liked it. She also said that she was against their marriage with Killian because she felt that she was not quite suited to life in the north and considered her a spoiled princess's daughter. Selina said that she understood her words completely, but at that moment, the Countess interrupted her and said that she was surprised the moment she met her. Her opinion had completely changed. Our heroine was surprised. Was that even possible? Apparently, that was how important this contract was. The Countess began to ask if everything was all right with Madame. The girl suddenly said that she had heard about the curse from Killian just a few days ago. The woman was shocked that she knew about the curse. Selina nodded her head and said that she knew that the children of this family were born with the energy of monsters, and she was shocked to learn about it and could not believe it. She knew better than to tell them that she had seen them as monsters and that she could cleanse them and restore their humanity. Selina said she knew how much the family wanted them dead. The girl explained that it was precisely because of this that they had to hide the children in the extension. The Countess nodded and said that she had been wrong about the Duke. She would have to apologize to him later because she thought he had kept everything from her that he could. Our heroine laughed to herself because that was exactly what he was going to do. In any case, she took the Countess by the hands and said that she, too, was one of the Seyfried. Countess Pontaine felt some relief from this conversation, so she even smiled, but at this point, Selina said that she was ashamed to admit something. She believed that she could not be as brave as the previous Duchess. It's just that now that she knows about the curse, she can't even imagine that she will ever have a child with Killian. This is precisely why the girl explained that she decided to raise Erhi and Irene as her own children. Suddenly, the Countess began to say that the main reason for her coming here was to convince with her own eyes of the safety of the children. If she had known about the curse earlier, she would not have allowed Claudia to enter this house. Selina was surprised that the Countess did not know about the curse. The woman nodded her head and said that the elders of this family were deeply mistaken in thinking that they could solve all the problems themselves, and it was because of them that the children were now suffering. She admitted that she always felt responsible for Claudia's death and could not even sleep because of it. At that time, she did not help the Duchess in any way and only criticized her, like everyone else. The Countess said that instead of trusting such a suspicious creature calling itself Havina, it would be better to simply give up the children. Selina asked again in surprise about Havina. The woman said that everything was correct, because Claudia was not in her right mind at the time. The previous Duchess was obsessed with the idea of having children safely, and once, she even said that the goddess Havina came to her. Selina was shocked, but with a surprised expression on her face, she asked what the goddess had told her. Pontin said that she had told her to save the children if she gave her body. Our heroine fell into thought. Havina said that she could not completely possess Claudia because she had enormous magical power. But what if it was all a lie? What if she had failed in taking over the Duchess's body? Selina had to find out exactly how Claudia had died. Meanwhile, Killian tried to bring the girl back from his thoughts, asking if she was ready, since the carriage was already waiting. Our heroine nodded her head and said that everything was fine, so they could see her out. It was just the Countess of Pontin, who was standing outside, waiting to be escorted out. The woman saw the Duke and Duchess and immediately smiled. The woman was glad that she could say goodbye to them before she left, and she was very sorry that the Marquise had given them so much trouble. Our heroine sighed and said that he had left too quickly. The Countess was surprised and assumed that she had not heard. According to rumors, the Marquise had fallen ill because of contaminated fertilizers. Cielina asked in confusion, assuming that he was talking about manure. The Countess sighed and suggested that he had fallen into a pit of fertilizer while walking through the western forest. The girl began to put the puzzle together, because the western forest is a forbidden area where the annex is located. Only elite Killian warriors have access there. While the Duke was helping the Countess with her things, our heroine realized why Killian had returned that time with Erhi and Irene. And all this to carry out his revenge without her? At this point, Countess Pontaine turned to the Duke and said that he was very lucky to marry Cielina. Before leaving, she turned to the Duchess and said that she hoped to come to them next time by invitation. And she also asked her not to forget their promise. The girl smiled happily and began waving after the departing carriage. But the Duke asked in surprise what promise they were talking about. That day, Cielina asked for a promise that if something happened to her, the Countess would have to take care of Erhi and Irene. Our heroine smiled at the Duke and said that just as he had a secret with the children, so they, the girls, had their own secrets. The action moves to the children, who were sitting in their room and doing their own thing. Erhi was reading a book, and his sister was humming something. At this point, Irene asked Cielina what she was doing today. Also, Erhi said that the doctor wanted to come for a checkup today. The girl remembered about the doctor and agreed that they should be examined, because from now on they would live here, so they should try not to cause him any trouble. They both started shaking their heads, because they didn't want to upset Cielina. Our heroine understood that even though she had cleared their energy, they still didn't know how it could affect their condition. So, being a doctor under the previous Duke, he most likely knows about the curse, and she is sure that he knows how to keep a secret. And it was precisely because of this, since he was the doctor of the previous head of this house. But she did not have time to finish her thought, because she was informed that the doctor wanted to see her. At that moment, Yemen Anral entered the room and said that he was at her service. The girl asked him to come closer. Cielina said that she heard that he had been serving this family for a long time. The man responded that it was a real honor for him to serve this family all his life. The girl was surprised. She was told that he had suddenly decided to resign after the death of the previous Duke and Duchess. He must know something. At this point, Cielina said what she wanted him to come to the estate for. She wanted him to examine the children of the previous Duke and Duchess. The smile immediately disappeared from Yemen's face. The girl continued to say that there had been many rumors about the children's weakness, but they had recently gained a lot of weight, so she would like to know their condition. After all, she knew that Yemen was the only one who knew the medical history of the previous head of Seyfried. The man agreed with the Duchess in a trembling voice. In that case, Cielina breathed a sigh of relief and asked him to call her as soon as he finished. It seemed that, contrary to her fears, there were no problems after all. Everything was going smoothly. After some time, the doctor asked if it was true that they were twins. Cielina was surprised by this question, so after confirming these words, she asked what was wrong. Yemen sighed and said that the young lord's physical development was quite unusual for a 7-year-old. Cielina asked if the doctor was making the boy older than his age. The man, judging by his voice, was worried. He said that the growth rate of twins is not always the same, however. Cielina asked him not to keep him waiting and to tell her if something was bothering him. Yemen asked him to promise that no harm would come to him because of this, because he had never told anyone about it and kept it a secret. If the Duke found out, his life would be in danger. Our heroine was shocked, but said that she would keep their conversation a secret. If he so wished, she could write him a letter of recommendation to Prince Kiev. The man began to speak in a trembling voice about how one terrible night he accidentally saw the corpse of the previous Duchess. At that time, he was young and energetic. All he was told was that she died during the monster attack, and he thought it was strange that the monster attacked when he was not around. That is why he dared to open the lid of her coffin and assess everything for himself. To his horror, there were no wounds left by the monsters on her body. Her body was completely unharmed, but there was one but. Her whole body and face were covered with some kind of spots and wrinkles, like a dried piece of bark. Our heroine asked in bewilderment whether Yaman really wanted to say that her body had been replaced with that of some elderly woman. But the doctor shouted, saying that it was the previous duchess, and it seemed as if the flow of time had simply sped up for her. So Claudia grew old, and Ari grew up. The flow of time became abnormal, or began to correspond to someone's wishes. Was it Ari's fault? But he was simply cursed and nothing more. In that case, is it really the fault of the goddess Havina? What if her power is not given to her for her own good, but is just a trick of the goddess? At this moment, our heroine was finally pulled out of her thoughts by the maid, who had been desperately calling her name for a couple of minutes. Selina asked what happened, and Lily replied that she had been asking about dinner all along. 3 boxes of groceries had arrived. At this point, our heroine remembered that she was supposed to have dinner with Killian that evening. Lily was surprised, saying that his lordship had personally invited her. Our heroine was just thinking that she could make a mistake if she saw him now. Her head was spinning from all the thoughts. She knew she had to leave the Duke before Sion showed up. If she knew too many of this family's secrets, she would be a threat to them. The maid asked in surprise what was wrong with Madame, to which Selina apologized, and then asked to tell Hans to tell the Duke that she did not want to have dinner today. Lily suggested that she was feeling unwell, but the Duchess said that she had too much on her mind at the moment and needed to think things over in solitude. Actually, news that Selina wanted to meet Killian later reached him. The guy was surprised that she wanted to think about something alone. Hans replied that these were the words her maid had conveyed to him. The butler asked the Duke what he would do. After a heavy sigh, Killian said that he had no appetite, so he wanted to rest, and Hans could go free. After some time, he was walking along the corridors, not understanding when he began to worry so much about her. What is she going to think about? This was the question that haunted the Duke. From what bothered her to what she liked and disliked, the Duke found himself wishing he knew her better. The prince's daughter, his wife, or the children's guardian. He wants to know what Selina is like, but if he asks, what will her reaction be? At that moment, the guy suddenly stopped in front of the door, which was open. He wondered if there was anyone else there, and just then he heard voices coming from inside. It was at that very moment that the Duke heard Selina say that she would need to see Pavel tomorrow. Killian was shocked, because this name was familiar to him. The first person he thought of was Pavel Yotrika. Meanwhile, Lily thought about it, saying that he should be fine. He avoids people, so she never got to see him. And when she goes to visit him, he doesn't even open the door for her. Moreover, according to one of the servants who brings him books, he likes to walk with Anastasia in the evenings. Our heroine assumed that he was walking nearby, and she also hoped that he would become a good teacher for children. Suddenly, the girl saw herself in the reflection and thought that she dressed as if she was going to run away from here, but at least this way she wouldn't freeze. However, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to find Pavel in such a vast territory, but it was very difficult not to notice the dog happily walking around the area. It was thanks to the dog that our heroine was able to find the guy she approached. Pavel was surprised by such an unexpected visit, but immediately realized that it was the Duchess. He bowed and said that he was in good health thanks to her. Selina laughed and said that he did not have to be so formal with her, but Pavel responded to this by saying that although he was blind, he could still bow, and even his poverty did not mean that he had lost his pride. At this point, the guy started to apologize, because he was used to paying attention to all sorts of little things. Selina was surprised that he was so upset about what he had just said. Our heroine smiled and said that he shouldn't worry about it so much, and by the way, she wasn't kidding when she said that he could communicate with her without embarrassment. It wouldn't hurt her. She also added that she wants to be close to him, because he will teach children. And still Pavel was surprised, so he asked if his lordship had approved of this idea. At that moment, the guy started to come closer. But, branches! Our heroine saw them, so she decided that she should help Pavel and stopped him. The girl immediately apologized after this, saying that she thought he might trip. Pavel was incredibly embarrassed by this sharp but gentle touch of the Duchess. Selina began to bend down to help him lift the cane, but the boy said that he could lift it himself. There was no need to bother. Our heroine sat down and asked him to calm down, because he could get dirty while he was looking for the cane. The girl nevertheless picked up the cane and held it out with a smile on her face, but suddenly Pavel was so close that it seemed like they shouldn't be standing like that. At that very moment, the Duke called out to our heroine. Selina was very surprised, so she asked Killian what he was doing here at such an hour. But Killian's face was not so happy. He was definitely not happy with what he saw. At this point, Pavel reminded her that he was there. The guy asked if Duke Seyfried had come to see them. The girl apologized and came closer. She offered to help him up, but at that moment, Killian also approached the Duchess. He took the initiative and took the cane from Selina, then handed it to Pavel and helped him stand up. Our heroine smiled and introduced Killian to Pavel. She just wanted to introduce them. The Duke suddenly said that he didn't even know how he should address the sage, even if he was a former one. The girl was definitely surprised at that moment. Pavel asked not to add any formalities and to simply call him by his first name. Killian said he understood him, and then said he also heard Pavel complain to his wife about wanting to visit the snowy plains. Our heroine was shocked that the Duke began the conversation, not with a greeting, but with a provocation of the future tutor of children. However, at that moment, Pavel fell to his knees and began to beg the Duke to allow him to visit the snowy plains. The Duke warned that those plains were simply teeming with monsters, and all because of the destroyed temple, and in order to open the gates, he asks him to risk the lives of people for such a trifle. Killian asked in bewilderment if he really thought he would open those gates to a man who had betrayed his comrades and his country. Pavel lowered his head in despair, and soon a gloomy silence fell. However, after a few moments, Pavel said that on the plains there was someone who had turned into a monster because of him. The guys were shocked. The boy screamed and cried, saying that he had to fix it, and that was the only reason he still hadn't lost the will to live, even after all the insults and humiliation. Killian was surprised, and even noticed that Pavel spoke as if all the accusations against him were unfair. But the guy said that he understood the Duke's mistrust. He had no evidence to prove the real culprit, but it was still true. The accusations against him were unfair. Looking at the Duchess, Pavel begged at least her to believe what he was saying. And yet Killian stood before his wife and told the sage that he had never answered him. Why exactly did he want to go to the snowy plains? Pavel replied that only there could he find the key to the riddle that he had wanted to solve for so long. Killian just laughed at this point and said that it sounded like he just hoped that that's where the answers to all his questions were. Pavel continued to insist, telling the Duke that he was ready to devote his entire life to him. He only needed his consent, and he was ready to do anything. The Duke stood his ground. He gave him a firm no, because he was not going to expose his knights to such danger. Soon Killian left, and our heroine sat down next to the crying Pavel and said that she was very sorry. She did not think that this conversation would go exactly like this. Holding back his pain, the sage said that before the false accusation, he was busy looking for a cure for all diseases, and there was one person unknown to him who provided rare herbs. Pavel accepted his kindness and immersed himself in his research, but he was too naive. This unknown person ultimately wanted to use his research to turn people into monsters, and they say that ignorance is a sin. Pavel understood that it was his own fault that he had not seen the evil intent, so the Duchess had nothing to regret. Nevertheless, it was already getting cold, so it was better to go inside. Our heroine also believed that everything would be fine with the children while she had the power of the goddess. But now that it became difficult to trust her, she had to clutch at straws. And yet, what was Killian thinking? The girl entered her room in a fit of emotion, and, to her great surprise, found Killian. The girl approached him and asked what he was doing there, to which he immediately responded. The reason for his late visit was that he just wanted to talk to her before going to bed. But the first thing the girl said was a request for Pavel's consent. He thought he could find treatment for the children, and if the house could help him. Killian stopped her at this point and asked if he should continue to listen to his wife defend her secret lover. Our heroine certainly didn't expect to hear these words, so she asked in bewilderment what he was talking about, and the Duke continued speaking. He knew that they would meet in the garden, because last night, when he wanted to go to her, he accidentally overheard her conversation with the maid. Selina immediately realized that yesterday evening had not been very positive, because she had declined his invitation to dinner, but Killian surprised her even more. He said that he had no idea, but it seemed that this conversation had made him jealous. After these words, the girl seemed to be pierced by a spark. How could this happen? Was Killian jealous of her? The guy continued to say that, although he had managed to cope with the management of the duchy, he had no idea how well he treated her. He smiled and asked her to understand him, because even in this he was not particularly strong. But now he wished her sweet dreams. After some time, the girl was in thought. She still could not believe that Killian was jealous. Perhaps he was mistaken, because in the original story, he stayed with Sion. Suddenly, our heroine was interrupted by Irene, who asked the girl what she was thinking about so much. Shelina noticed the girl holding a drawing. She asked to see this drawing, and there was a portrait of Anna. The Duchess praised the girl, saying that it turned out very similar. Irene was a smart girl, but now there was also interest in what Ari was doing now. Looking at the boy, the girl noticed with the naked eye that he had become more mature in recent days. The last time she saw him, it seemed to her as if his wings were bigger than Irene's. Well, in any case, it was time for something else. The girl called the children, saying that their teacher would soon come to them. The children were not particularly happy with this and immediately began to say that Tilina could teach them herself. Cielina, with a smile on her face, told them that the teacher would teach them more interesting things than she could. But, of course, maybe she would have taken up their teaching herself if she had known more about this world. At that moment, a maid entered the room and conveyed the information that Baroness Maria Gilrod had arrived. Cielina asked to be shown to the guest room. In just a few moments, our heroine met the Baroness. The woman said that it was a great honor for her to meet Cielina. The Duchess also greeted Madame Gilrod, saying that she, as a former director of the Academy, must be very experienced. Although she looks stern, of course. Maria smiled and assumed that Cielina didn't know, so she wanted to tell her something. It turned out that Lord Sion, her younger brother, was also her apprentice. Cielina was surprised, and then said that the Baroness must have heard that the children had recently recovered. Maria said that she was aware of the situation and also heard that they had not been taught etiquette. The woman suggested that the Duchess was very concerned about this. Cielina replied that when it came to adapting to social norms, various difficulties arose. Our heroine wanted to say something, but the Baroness interrupted her and said that the children were already lagging behind. She was worried that she was not taking this seriously enough. Cielina was surprised, of course, but still asked to let her introduce the children. Only Maria replied that it was unnecessary. She considered the first lesson the most important, so she would not like to be disturbed. And still, our heroine wanted to say something, but the Baroness continued to assure the Duchess that she would not regret it, so she asked to trust everything to her. Soon the girl sat down on the chair and exhaled. The woman was very passionate about teaching, so she hoped that everything would be fine with Erhi and Irene. Lily at this point turned to our heroine and said that Madame had changed a lot since she got married. Cielina, of course, asked what she meant. The maid said that she was not so worried when Lord Sion went to the academy. Cielina replied sheepishly that she was just young, and yet the maid said that she understood her in a way. She remembered exactly in what state the gentleman returned home at the end of the first semester. The nanny who bathed him then cried because she was upset about the bruises on his thighs and buttocks. Cielina was instantly pierced by horror. The girl realized that he was beaten there, and this means that our heroine jumped up and headed to the children's room, but tried to push away the bad thoughts. There were so many teachers at the academy. She can't be sure that it was Madame Gilrod who beat Sion, but she can't sit idly by. Our heroine wanted to see everything with her own eyes, when suddenly the door in front of her swung open and Madame Gilrod came out. Was the lesson really over? But it still had to go on for another hour. The woman immediately screamed, saying that she was quitting. She did not understand how they could look for a tutor when they had not even curbed the children's magical powers. Our heroine, of course, was very surprised, but she was even more interested in what Madame Gilrod was hiding behind her back. The girl asked to show what she had in her hand, when suddenly the woman became very tense. The woman began to retreat, but our heroine began to suspect her even more. Maria asked her to calm down, but Cielina nevertheless snatched the pointer, broken into two pieces, and asked in bewilderment, was the Baroness really trying to punish the children with this?